Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. The crackle of the radio cut through the stillness of the ranger station, jarring me from my thoughts. It was early morning, the kind where mist still clung to the pines, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I had been a ranger at Olympic National Park for nearly a decade, and the calm of these early hours was usually my favorite part of the job. "Ranger Krause, come in." Although the dispatcher's voice was tight, it was unusual for her typically laid-back, calm chatter. I reached for the radio, a knot forming in my stomach. "This is Krause. Go ahead." "We've got a situation near Skooka Meadows. Campers reported missing since yesterday. Last known location was off-trail, heading east from the main campground. Need you to check it out." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. Missing campers. It's never good news, especially this deep into the wilderness. Copy that. I'm on my way. Now other details. Negative. Just get out there and report back. And Krause, be careful. Something about this one feels off. The radio fell silent, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. I'd done search and rescues before, but something in the dispatcher's tone set me on edge. Shaking it off, I gathered my gear standard issue pack, first aid kits, extra water. I hesitated at the gun safe, then decided against it. In all my years as a ranger, I never needed a firearm. Why start now? As I loaded up my truck, the sky darkened ominously. The storm was rolling in because of course it was. Perfect weather for traipsing through dense forest looking for lost hikers. I took a moment to stare at the tree line, the ancient pines looming like sentinels. For a second I could have sworn I saw a movement in the shadows, but I blinked, and it was gone. The drive to Skipitas was long and winding, the road narrowing until branches scraped against the sides of my truck like bony fingers. I'd always loved these woods, felt at home among the towering trees and hidden streams. But today, something felt different. The forest seemed to press in closer, watchful and hungry. I parked at the trailhead, the gravel crunching under my tires sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I stepped out, the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I radioed in my arrival, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the wilderness. "This is Ranger Krause. I'm starting my search at Skooka Meadows trailhead. I'll check in every hour." "Okay. Copy that, Krause. Stay alert out there." I shouldered my pack, taking a deep breath of the damp, pine-scented air. The trail stretched before me, disappearing into the gloom of the forest. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of apprehension as I took my first steps into the woods. The trees seemed to close in behind me, muffling the sounds of the outside world. All I could hear was the crunch of my boots on the path and my own breathing. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, tracking my every move. I tried to focus on the task at hand, scanning the ground for any signs of the missing campers, but my mind kept wandering, replaying old stories I'd heard around campfires, tales of hikers gone missing, of strange sounds in the night, of things that lurked just beyond the firelight. I'd always dismissed them as folklore, the kind of stories people tell to make the wilderness seem more exciting. But now, with each step taking me further from civilization, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The forest had secrets, and I was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, I was about to uncover one of them. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, I realized I was in for a long night. Whatever was waiting for me in the depths of the woods, I had a sinking feeling that my life was about to change forever. As twilight settled over the forest, I found myself at a crossroads. The main trail stretched ahead, well-worn and familiar. But to my right, barely visible in the fading light, was a narrow path that seemed to wind deeper into the untamed wilderness. My instincts screamed to stick to the main trail, but something tugged at me, urging me towards the unknown. With a deep breath, I made my decision. The missing campers had reportedly gone off trail, and if I was going to find them, I needed to follow their path. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped onto the narrow trail, the undergrowth immediately closing in around me. The forest seemed to change as I ventured further from the main path. The trees grew older, their trunks gnarled and twisted into grotesque shapes. Moss hung from the branches like tattered curtains, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. After what felt like hours of hiking, I came across the first sign of the missing campers, a small clearing barely big enough for a tent, with remnants of a campfire in the center. I knelt down, running my fingers through the cold ashes. Something wasn't right. The fire pit was scattered as if someone had frantically stomped it out. As I stood, a faint sound caught my attention, a rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. I swung my flashlight towards the noise, my heart pounding. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure ducking behind a tree too tall and thin to be human. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weak and foreign in the oppressive silence. "This is Ranger Kraus. Is anyone there?" No response came, save for the echo of my own voice bouncing back at me from the depths of the forest. I shook my head, trying to clear the creeping dread that was settling over me. I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing things that weren't there. I needed to focus on the task at hand. I continued on, pushing deeper into the wilderness. The trail had long since disappeared, leaving me to navigate through dense underbrush and fallen logs. The forest seemed to be actively working against me, branches snagging my clothes and roots threatening to trip me with every step. As I climbed over a particularly large fallen tree, a smell hit me, foul and putrid like rotting meat left in the sun. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. The stench seemed to be coming from up ahead, and every instinct told me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not if there was a chance the campers were in trouble. I pressed on, the smell growing stronger with each step. My flashlight beam fell on something ahead, a splash of color against the dark forest floor. As I drew closer, my blood ran cold. It was a backpack torn to shreds and covered in what looked horribly like dried blood. I knelt down to examine it, my hands shaking. The fabric was shredded by something with incredible strength. The contents were scattered across the forest floor. As I sifted through the debris, I found a wallet. Inside was a driver's license belonging to one of the missing campers. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't good. I needed to radio for backup to get more people out here to search. But as I reached for my radio, I froze. In the silence of the forest, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of heavy, lumbering footsteps coming closer. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was a noise that didn't belong in this world, a sound that spoke of hunger and rage and something utterly inhuman. I scrambled to my feet, desperately searching for a place to hide. The dense underbrush that had been my enemy earlier now became my only hope for survival. I dove into a thicket of ferns, trying to make myself as small as possible. Through the gaps in the leaves, I saw it into the clearing. The creature, for I couldn't bring myself to call it a person, was massive, easily 7 feet tall. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over a frame that was simultaneously emaciated and powerfully built. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Where there should have been eyes, there were only empty sockets, dark and cavernous. Its mouth was a gaping maw filled with jagged, yellowed teeth. As it moved, I could see that its joints bent in ways that defied human anatomy. The thing paused, lifting its head to sniff the air. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't detect me. For a moment it seemed confused, turning its eyeless face this way and that. Then, with horrifying suddenness, it turned directly towards my hiding spot. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I burst from the phones and ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear the creature give chase, its heavy footfalls getting closer with each passing second. The forest blown around me as I ran, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard it seemed it might burst from my chest. I didn't dare look back, focusing only on putting one foot in front of the other and finding a way to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I had run straight off the edge of a steep embankment. For a terrifying moment, I was in free fall. Then I hit the slope, tumbling head over heels down the hillside. Rocks and branches battered my body as I rolled until finally coming to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, every part of me screaming in agony. But the sound of the creature crashing down the hill after me spurred me back into action. Ignoring the pain, I staggered to my feet and started running again. The chase seemed to go on forever, a nightmarish game of cat and mouse through the dark forest. Every time I thought I had lost it, I would hear those heavy footsteps closing in again. My legs felt like lead, my lungs on fire. But I kept going, driven by pure terror. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center was an old abandoned cabin, its windows dark and empty. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards it, praying that the door wasn't locked. I slammed into the door, fumbling with the handle. By some miracle it opened. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me and franching for something to barricade it. An old bookcase stood nearby, and with strength born of desperation, I managed to drag it in front of the door. No sooner had I done so than something hit the door with tremendous force, making the whole cabin shudder. It backed away, looking frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing, just dusty old furniture and cobwebs. The pounding on the door continued, each impact threatening to shatter the fragile barrier between me and the monster outside. I retreated to the far corner of the cabin, my back pressed against the wall, watching in horror as the door began to splinter. As I stood there, certain that these were my last moments, a sound cut through the noise of the creature's assault. A voice calling out in the darkness. "Kraus, where are you?" It was Nate, another ranger. I had never been so glad to hear another human voice in my life. "Here," I screamed. "I'm in here." What happened next was a blur. There was the sound of a gunshot, then another. The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. Now Mike was there, forcing the door open, his face pale with shock as he took in the scene. "What happened here?" he asked, helping me to my feet. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could I possibly describe what I had seen, what had chased me through the forest? Instead, I just shook my head, gesturing weakly towards the door. Nate seemed to understand. He nodded grimly, leading me out of the cabin. "Let's get you out of here," he said. "Whatever that thing was, it's gone now." As we made our way back through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The creature might have been driven off, but I knew deep in my bones that it was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The drive back to the ranger station was a blur. Nate kept glancing at me, concern etched on his face, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. How could I explain what I had seen, what had chased me through the darkness? The words seemed to stick in my throat, leaving me mute and trembling. When we finally arrived, I was immediately whisked away to the infirmary. Dr. Reeves, a kind-faced woman, examined me thoroughly, clucking her tongue at the array of cuts, bruises, and scrapes that covered my body. "What on earth happened out there, Evan?" she asked as she clawed a particularly nasty gash on my arm. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I tell her about the creature with its eyeless face and impossible anatomy? About the chase through the forest that defied all logic? I settled for a half-truth. I'm not sure, it's all a blur. Dr. Reeves gave me a long, searching look that didn't press the issue. Instead, she continued patching me up in silence, occasionally murmuring words of comfort when I winced in pain. After what felt like hours, I was finally released from the infirmary with strict orders to rest and recover. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew sleep was the last thing on my mind. The events of the day played on repeat in my head, each memory more terrifying than the last. I found myself wandering to the edge of the ranger compound, staring out into the dark forest beyond. Somewhere out there, that thing was still lurking. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. "Evan?" The voice startled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Nate approaching, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. He offered one to me. "Thought you could use this?" I accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of coffee. For a moment we stood in silence, both of us gazing out at the tray line. Finally Nate spoke. "You want to talk about what happened out there?" I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. "I'm not sure you'd believe me if I told you." Nate turned to face me, his expression serious. "Try me. I've seen some strange things in these woods over the years. Whatever you saw, well, I'm willing to listen." And so, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, I told him everything. The strange tracks, the torn backpack, the creature that defied description. As I spoke, I could see Nate's face growing paler, his grip on his mug tightening. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then Nate let out a long, shaky breath. "Jesus, Evan, that's something else." "Ma, believe me?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Nate nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do, because I've seen something similar." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" "When, about 5 years ago, I was doing a routine patrol near the North Ridge. Came across something that shouldn't exist. Huge, gray skin that moved in ways that didn't make sense. I only saw it for a moment before it disappeared into the trees, but it was enough to haunt my nightmares for months. I felt a mix of relief and dread wash over me. Relief that I wasn't alone, that someone else had seen the impossible. The dread at the implications. If Nate had seen something similar years ago, that meant it's been out there all this time, maybe even longer. Nate nodded grimly. "And now it's killed those campers. We can't ignore this, Evan. We need to do something." I knew he was right. But the thought of going back into those woods, of potentially facing that creature again, filled me with terror. Yet I also knew we had a responsibility to the missing campers, to future visitors to the park, and to the land we were sworn to protect. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nate's expression hardened with determination. "We go back, find evidence, and put an end to whatever hell is out there." As I nodded in agreement, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to embark on something that would change our lives forever. The forest loomed before us, dark and foreboding, holding secrets that defied imagination. And somewhere in its depths, a monster waited. The next few days passed in a haze of debriefings, reports, and hushed conversations. Officially, we were dealing with a case of missing campers, possibly the victims of a bear attack. Unofficially, Nate and I were preparing for something far worse. We met in secret, away from the prying eyes and ears of our fellow rangers. In Nate's small cabin on the edge of the compound, we pored over maps, discussed strategies, and tried to make sense of what we were up against. "We need to be smart about this," Nate said, tracing a route on the map spread out before us. "Whatever this thing is, it's dangerous." We can't just go charging in there half-cocked. I nodded, my fingers absently tracing the scar on my arm, a constant reminder of my encounter. What do you suggest? Nate leaned back, his face grim. We want to treat this like we're hunting a predator, because that's exactly what we're doing. We need to understand its territory, its habits, its weaknesses. Do we even know if it has weaknesses? I asked. The memory of its inhuman strength and speed still fresh in my mind. Everything has a weakness, Nate replied firmly. We just need to find it. Over the next few hours, we formulated a plan. We would return to the area where I had encountered the creature, this time armed and prepared. We'd set up camera traps, hoping to capture evidence of its existence. And we'd lay bait, trying to lure it into the open where we could observe it safely. As we worked, I couldn't help but voice the fear that had been gnawing at me. What if we're in over our heads, Nate? What if this is something we're not equipped to handle? Nate was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Then he turned to me, his expression resolute. Maybe we are. But if we don't do something, more people are gonna die. We're the only ones who know what's really out there. But it has to be us. I knew he was right, but it didn't make the prospect any less terrifying. As we finalized our plans, I found myself wondering if we were making a terrible mistake. But the memory of that torn backpack, of the lives already lost, steeled my resolve. We had to do this, no matter the cost. The night before we set out, I found myself unable to sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with eyeless faces and the sound of heavy footsteps in the dark. I awoke before dawn, feeling as if I hadn't slept at all. As I prepared my gear, checking and double-checking everything, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Whatever happened out there in the woods, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Nate met me at the trailhead, his face a mask of determination. We did one final check of our equipment, cameras, bait, weapons, and enough supplies to last us several days in the wilderness. As the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, we set off into the forest, leaving the safety of civilization behind. The woods seemed different now, charged with a sense of menace that I had never noticed before. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every rustle in the undergrowth was a possible threat. We moved silently, communicating with hand signals and meaningful looks. It took us most of the day to reach the area where I had first encountered the creature. The torn backpack was still there, undisturbed since my frantic flight. Seeing it again brought back a flood of terrifying memories, but I forced them down, focusing on the task at hand. We set up our first camera trap, carefully concealing it in the underbrush. Then we moved on, setting up more cameras in a wide perimeter around the area. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the depths of the forest, something was aware of our presence. As dusk fell, Nate and I set up our camp in a small clearing, choosing a spot with good visibility in all directions. We worked in tense silence, both hyper-aware of our surroundings. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves set our nerves on edge. "I'll take shifts tonight," Nate said as we finished setting up. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. We'll take first watch. I nodded, grateful for the chance to rest. But as I lay in my tent, sleep eluded me. The forest seemed alive with sounds, each one a potential threat. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were a confused jumble of shadowy figures and echoing footsteps. Nate woke me from my shift, his face taut with tension. "Nothing so far," he reported, "but stay alert, something doesn't feel right out there." I took up my position, rifle across my lap, eyes straining to penetrate the darkness beyond our small circle of lamplight. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity of watchful waiting. Just before dawn, I heard it, a low guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give away my position. The sound came again, closer this time. I reached for the radio to wake Nate, but before I could, a figure burst into the clearing. It was a deer, its eyes wide with terror, foam flecking its muzzle. Barely registering our presence, it charged through the camp and disappeared into the trees on the other side. Seconds later, something else entered the clearing. On the dim pre-dawn light, I could just make out a tall gray figure moving with an unnatural loping gait. It paused for a moment, its eyeless face turning toward our camp. I held my breath, my finger tightening on the trigger of my rifle. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it would charge us. Then it turned, following the deer's path into the forest. As soon as it was gone, I scrambled to wake Nate. "It was here," I gasped as he emerged from the tent. Nate's face paled. "Did it see us?" "I don't know. I think it was too focused on the deer it was chasing." We spent the next hour in tense silence, weapons at the ready, waiting to see if the creature would return. But as the sun rose, painting the forest in golden light, we began to relax slightly. "We need to check the cameras," Nate said finally. "With any luck, we've got some solid evidence now." We set out, following the trail of cameras we'd set up the day before. The first few yielded nothing, but as we approached the area where I'd had my initial encounter, we struck gold. The camera had captured a clear image of the creature. Seeing it in the harsh light of day, frozen on the small screen, was almost worse than encountering it in person. Its grotesque features were laid bare, the eyeless sockets, the mouth full of jagged teeth, the gray skin pulled tight over an impossible frame. "Jesus!" Nate breathed, staring at the image. "What the hell is this thing?" I shook my head, unable to find words. The evidence was right there in front of us, undeniable proof that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. As we continued checking the cameras, we found more images, building a picture of the creature's movements. It seemed to have a territory, a hunting ground that it patrolled regularly. "We can use this," Nate said, his voice taking on a determined edge. "If we can predict its movements, maybe we can set a trap." The idea filled me with equal parts hope and dread. The thought of actively trying to lure this thing was terrifying, but I knew it might be our only chance to end this nightmare. As I headed back to camp to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer the hunters. In this ancient forest, against a creature that defied explanation, we were the prey, and our time was running out. Over the next few days, Nate and I fell into a grim routine. We'd spent our days scouting the area, checking and repositioning cameras, and analyzing the creature's movements. Our nights were spent in watchful vigilance, taking turns to guard our camp against the horrors that lurked in the darkness. We caught more glimpses of the creature, always at a distance, always just on the edge of our perception. Each sighting left us shaken, reinforcing the otherworldly nature of what we were dealing with. On the fourth day, as we pored over our map, marking the creature's known locations, a pattern began to emerge. "Look at this," Nate said, tracing a rat with his finger. "It seems to follow this circuit roughly every 48 hours. Only in studying the map, he was right. The creature's movements, while not entirely predictable, seemed to follow a loose pattern. If we're right about this," Nate continued, "we might be able to set up an ambush here." He pointed to a spot where the creature's path narrowed between two ridges. The plan we formulated over the next few hours was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but as the best chance we had. We would set up a blind in the trees, armed with high-powered rifles. The lowest we placed bait, the deer carcass we'd found earlier that day, likely one of the creature's own victims. As we made our preparations, I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. "Nate," I said as we were setting up the blind, "what if this doesn't work? What if we're not enough to stop this thing?" Nate paused in his work, his face grim. Then at least we tried, and hopefully the evidence we've gathered will be enough to convince others to take this seriously. The day of our planned ambush dawned cold and misty. We took our positions early, settling into the blind with our weapons at the ready. Hours crawled by, the forest around us was eerily silent. As dusk approached, the mist thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. The night below us was little more than a dark shape in the gathering gloom. Movement, Nate whispered suddenly, gesturing to our left. I squinted into the mist, my heart pounding. At first I saw nothing. Then a shape began to emerge from the fog. Tall, gray, moving with that unnatural gait that haunted my nightmares. The creature approached the bait cautiously, its eyeless face swiveling back and forth as if sensing the air. As it drew closer, I raised my rifle, taking careful aim. Wait, Nate breathed. Let it get closer. The creature was directly below us now, standing over the bait. I could hear the wet sounds of tearing flesh as it began to feed. Now Nate hissed. We fired simultaneously. The sound of our shots shattered the silence of the forest. The creature jerked as the bullets hit, letting out a bone-chilling shriek that made my blood run cold. But it didn't go down. Instead, it whirled towards us, its eyeless face somehow finding our position unerringly. With a roar that seemed to shake the very trees, it charged. Run, Nate yelled. Already scrambling down from the blind, I found my heart and throat. We hit the ground running, crashing through the underbrush. Behind us, I could hear the creature in pursuit, its heavy footfalls gaining on us with terrifying speed. We burst out of the trees onto a rocky slope. Nate stumbled, crying out in pain as he twisted his ankle. I grabbed his arm, holding him up, but I knew we couldn't outrun the creature, not with Nate injured. Keep going, Nate gasps, pushing me away. He'll hold it off. No. I started to protest, but the decision was taken out of our hands. The creature exploded out of the tree line, its massive form silhouetted against the darkening sky. It paused for a moment as if deciding which of us to pursue. Then, with horrifying speed, it charged straight at Nate. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Nate raise his rifle, saw the muzzle flash as he fired. The creature staggered, but didn't stop. It reached Nate in two massive strides, swamping him up in its grotesque arms. Nate's scream cut off abruptly as the creature's jaws clamped down on his throat. I stood frozen in horror, unable to move or look away from the nightmarish scene before me. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone, melting back into the forest with Nate's limp form still in its grasp. I don't know how long I stood there, shock and grief warring within me. When I finally moved, it was with a sense of numb detachment. I gathered our scattered gear, collected the camera footage, and began the long trek back to civilization. As I walked, I knew that this was far from over. Nate's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I would bring back the evidence, make people believe, and then I would return. This time, I wouldn't be hunting alone. This time, we would end this, once and for all. The weeks following my return from the forest were a blur of debriefings, psychological evaluations, and mounting frustration. Despite the evidence I brought back, photos, videos, physical samples weren't collected. There was a reluctance to accept the reality of what Nate and I had encountered. Mass hysteria, one official suggested. Some kind of undiscovered predator, another theorized. But I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes, watched it take Nate, and I knew it was still out there. It took months of pushing, calling in every favor I could, but finally a task force was assembled. A team of wildlife experts, military personnel, and seasoned rangers, all hand-picked, all briefed on what they might face. As we geared up for the expedition, I found myself thinking of Nate, his determination, bravery in the face of the unknown. I silently vowed that this time we would finish what we started. We entered the forest with a sense of grim purpose, This was no longer about documentation or study. It was about ending a threat, avenging those who had been lost. For days, we combed the area where Nate and I had encountered the creature. We found signs of its presence. Strange tracks, areas of forest unnaturally devoid of wildlife. The occasional grisly remains of its victims. But the creature itself remained elusive, always one step ahead of us. It was as if it knew we were hunting it, as if it was toying with us. On the 5th night of our expedition, as we huddled around our campfire, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest. We scrambled to our feet, weapons at the ready, forming a defensive circle. The attack when it came was swift and brutal. The creature burst from the darkness, a whirlwind of gray flesh and snapping jaws. 2 of our team went down in the initial onslaught, their cries cut short with sickening finality. What followed was a chaotic battle, muzzle flashes illuminating the night, the creature's inhuman shrieks mixing with our own shouts and screams. In the confusion, I found myself separated from the group, driven deeper into the forest by the rampaging beast. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. The sound of pursuit was close behind, the creature's heavy breathing mixing with my own panicked gasps. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment. I hit the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. As I lay there, dazed and winded, I heard the creature's approach slow to a stop above me. I looked up, my vision swimming, to see its monstrous form silhouetted against the night sky. This was it, I thought. This was how it would end. But as the creature began its descent towards me, something changed. A new sound filled the air. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. Searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the scene. The creature hesitated, its eyeless face turning towards the new threat. For a moment it stood frozen, caught in the harsh glare of the lights. Then, with a final bone-chilling shriek, it turned and loped off into the darkness. As the helicopter landed and my team rushed to my aid, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. We had driven it off, yes, but it was still out there, still a threat. In the days that followed, as we combed the forest with renewed determination, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a longer, darker struggle. The creature had been here for who knows how long, hidden in the depths of the wilderness, and now that its existence was known, now that we were actively hunting it, who could say what it might do? As we prepared to leave the forest, our expedition officially over, I took one last look at the towering trees, the misty valleys. Somewhere out there, the creature was waiting, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I would be back. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Angeles National Forest stretched before me, a vast expanse of green that had been my home and workplace for the past 6 years. As I stood at the trailhead, adjusting my pack and checking my gear one last time, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange path that had led me here. It was 2025, and just a few years ago, I had been Ryan Holloway, a 35-year-old IT specialist in Los Angeles. My life revolved around firewalls, data security, and the constant hum of servers. I used to joke that I'd grow old in a server room, my fingers permanently curved from typing and my eyes permanently squinted from staring at screens. But life has a way of upending our carefully laid plans. My marriage of 8 years crumbled, leaving me feeling lost and suffocated by the urban sprawl I once called home. The divorce was finalized in 2019, and I found myself desperate for an escape. The noise of the city, once a comforting backdrop to my life, became an oppressive cacophony. The startup culture that had once energized me now felt hollow and meaningless. It was during a weekend hiking trip meant to clear my head that I stumbled upon my new calling. I met a veteran ranger who spoke passionately about his job, about the forest's need for protection, and the satisfaction of working in nature. Something clicked inside me, and I knew I had found my escape. The transition wasn't easy. I had to go through rigorous training, learn new skills, and adjust to a completely different lifestyle. But with each passing day in the forest, I felt more at peace. The solitude that initially drew me here became both a comfort and, at times, an unsettling presence. Now, as I prepared to set out on what should have been a routine patrol, I couldn't shake an odd feeling of unease. The forest was quieter than usual, almost as if the wildlife had collectively decided to take a day off. Even the constant chatter of birds was noticeably absent. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to the unusual heat wave we'd been experiencing. Climate change had been hitting the forest hard in recent years, altering familiar patterns and creating new challenges for both the ecosystem and those of us tasked with protecting it. My job for the day was to check on a group of campers who had set up in a more secluded area, about 3 miles off the main trail. It wasn't uncommon for people to seek out these remote spots, especially with the surge in off-grid camping that had gained popularity in the post-pandemic years. As I set off down the trail, the crunch of gravel under wet boots was the only sound breaking the eerie silence. I couldn't help but feel that this day would be anything but routine. The forest, usually a source of comfort, felt different today. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier. I tried to distract myself by running through my mental checklist: water, check; first aid kit, check; radio, check. But as I delved deeper into the forest, the oppressive silence only grew, and with it a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. Little did I know as I made my way toward the campsite that this day would change everything. The first I thought I knew was about to reveal a side of itself that would challenge not only my perception of reality, but also my very sanity. The trail stretched before me, winding its way through towering pines and ancient oaks. As I walked, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. It was a sensation I'd experienced before in the forest, usually attributed to the hidden eyes of wildlife. But today it felt different, more intense, more intentional. I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the task at hand, checking on the campers, ensuring they were following regulations, and heading back. Simple, routine, yet with each step the feeling of wrongness grew, a creeping dread that wound its way up my spine and settled at the base of my skull. As I approached the area where the camper should be, the silence became even more pronounced. No laughter, no chatter. Not even the rustle of movement. Just an all-encompassing quiet that seemed to swallow every sound. I rounded a bend in the trail, expecting to see tents and a campfire. Instead, I was met with an empty clearing. The tents were there, 3 of them, but there was no sign of the campers. No backpacks propped against trees. No chairs around a fire pit. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. My heart rate quickened as I surveyed the scene. Everything looked undisturbed, yet fundamentally wrong. A deck of cards lay scattered near one of the tents, as if someone had been in the middle of a game and just left. I called out loudly, "Hello? Forest Service? Is anyone here?" Only silence answered me. As I moved through the campsite, looking for any clues as to where the campers might have gone, a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't right. People don't just disappear without a trace. There's always something left behind. A note. Signs of a hasty departure, something. I pulled out my radio, intending to call it in, but was met with only static. Typical, I thought, but the lack of communication only added to my growing unease. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards from the campsite, the ground was disturbed. It looked as if something heavy had been dragged across it. My breath caught in my throat as I approached. The tracks in the dirt were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Wide and deep, they were clearly not human nor any animal I recognized. As I stood there staring at the bizarre tracks, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. For a moment I considered heading back, calling for backup. but I couldn't leave without knowing what had happened to those campers. Taking a deep breath, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I followed the track. The trail left by whatever had made those strange tracks led me deeper into the forest to areas I had never explored before. As I pushed through the underbrush, the familiar landscape of the Angeles National Forest began to change subtly. The trees here seemed older, their trunks wider and more gnarled. The canopy above grew denser, filtering out more and more sunlight, until I found myself in a perpetual twilight. The air grew thick and heavy, laden with moisture that clung to my skin and clothes. It felt as if I was walking into a place that time had forgotten, a primeval corner of the forest, untouched by the modern world. The silence that had been so oppressive at the campsite was different here. It was alive somehow, pulsing with a tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I checked my watch, 2:30 p.m. I'd been following the trail for over an hour, yet it felt like I had stepped into another world entirely. The rational part of my mind, the part still clinging to the familiar and explainable, tried to make sense of my surroundings. Perhaps this was an older growth area of the forest that had somehow escaped logging or development. Maybe the unusual weather patterns of recent years had created this microclimate. But deep down, I knew these explanations were inadequate. There was something fundamentally wrong about this place, something that defied logical explanation. The tracks I'd been following became more erratic, twisting and doubling back on themselves as if whatever had made them was confused or disoriented. Or a chilling thought occurred to me as if it knew it was being followed and was trying to throw me off its trail. I paused to catch my breath and get my bearings. The dense canopy made it impossible to see the sun, and my compass was spinning wildly, rendering it useless. I was lost, I realized with a sinking feeling, lost in a part of the forest that shouldn't exist. As I stood there trying to decide whether to press on or attempt to retrace my steps, something caught my eye. Half buried in the damp earth was a boot. My heart raced as I knelt to examine it. It was caked with mud, but I recognized the brand. A popular hiking boot, the same kind I had seen one of the missing campers wearing in the photos their worried families had provided. This was the first real evidence I had found of the missing group, and it did nothing to assuage my fears. Why would someone abandon a single boot in the middle of the forest, and where was its owner? As I contemplated these questions, a sound broke through the oppressive silence. It was faint at first, barely perceptible over the sound of my own breathing. As I strained my ears, it became clearer. Something was moving through the forest, and it was heading in my direction. The movement was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was erratic, fast one moment and slow the next, as if whatever was making it was having difficulty navigating the terrain, or a terrifying thought occurred to me, as if it was searching for something, searching for me. I crouched low, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give away my position. The sound grew closer, and with it came a smell, a horrific stench of decay and rot that made my eyes water and my stomach churn. Through the trees I caught a glimpse of movement. Something large, much larger than any animal native to these woods, was weaving between the trunks. Its form was indistinct in the dim light, but what I could see made no sense. It seemed to shift and change as it moves, as if its very shape was uncertain. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible, but I knew that fleeing blindly through this unfamiliar terrain would only lead to disaster. I had to stay calm, to think rationally. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away, trying to put as much distance between myself and the creature as possible without making any sudden movements. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As I retreated, my foot caught on an exposed root. I stumbled, my arms windmilling as I fought to keep my balance, but it was too late. I fell backwards, landing hard on the forest floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the trees. For a moment, everything was still. Then the creature stopped moving. I could feel its attention shift, focusing on the source of the noise. A low, guttural sound filled the air, not quite a growl, nor quite a moan, but something in between that made my blood run cold. Whatever this thing was, it knew I was here, and it was coming for me. In that moment, as I lay there on the forest floor with an unknowable horror bearing down on me, I realized that the solitude I had sought in these woods had become a trap. The forest that had been my escape, my sanctuary, had turned into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no waking. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio, praying that somehow, against all odds, I would be able to call for help. But as I brought it to my lips, my hopes were dashed. The screen was dark, the battery inexplicably drained. I was alone, lost in an impossible forest, with something beyond my comprehension hunting me. And as the creature drew nearer, its erratic movements growing more purposeful, I knew that my life as I knew it was over. Whatever happened next would change me forever, if I survived it all. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was no longer the protector of this forest, I was its prey. Time seemed to slow as I lay there, paralyzed by fear, watching the creature approach through the trees. Each second stretched into an eternity, filled with the sound of my own ragged breathing and the irregular shuffling gait of the thing that hunted me. As it drew closer, details that my mind had initially refused to process began to come into focus. Its body was vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely elongated, standing at least 7 feet tall. The skin that covered its frame was a sickly pallid white, as if it had never been touched by sunlight. In some places it hung loose, while in others it stretched tight over bulging muscles or protruding bones. But it was the face that truly cemented the unreality of the situation. Where there should have been eyes, they were only sunken hollows, dark and impossibly deep. The nose was little more than 2 slits in the center of its face, and the mouth was a gaping maw lined with row upon row of needle-like teeth. As it entered the small clearing where I lay, the stench of decay intensified, so strong that I had to fight the urge to gag. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its joints bending in ways that defied anatomical logic. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of undiscovered species? A horrific mutation caused by environmental toxins? Or was I simply losing my mind, hallucinating this impossible creature as a result of stress and isolation? The creature paused at the edge of the clearing, its eyeless face turning towards me. Though it had no visible eyes, I could feel its attention focused on me with an intensity that was almost physical. It cocked its head to one side, reminding me eerily of a curious dog. If dogs were 7-foot-tall abominations that reeked of death, for a moment neither of us moved. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, the unnatural silence broken only by the sound of my thundering heart. Then, with a speed that belied its awkward appearance, the creature lunged. Adrenaline surged through my body, breaking the paralysis that had gripped me. I rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasping hands. As I scrambled to my feet, I caught a glimpse of its fingers, long, spindly things tipped with razor-sharp claws that left deep gouges in the earth where I'd been lying moments before. I ran. I ran with a desperation I had never known before, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction or stealth. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that thing. Behind me, I could hear it giving chase. Its movements were faster now, more assured, as if the thrill of the hunt had given it new purpose. Branches whooped at my face as I ran, leaving stinging cuts. But I barely noticed. The pain was nothing compared to the terror that drove me forward. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish chase. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on. The sound of pursuit was constant, sometimes fading slightly only to surge closer moments later. As I ran, the forest around me seemed to change. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little light had been filtering through. Roots rose from the ground like grasping hands, threatening to trip me with every step. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, when my body was screaming for me to stop, I saw something through the trees ahead. A structure of some kind. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. As I drew closer, I recognized it. An old ranger station, one that had been abandoned years ago due to budget cuts. It was run down, its wood-weathered gray, but it was shelter, a place to hide, to catch my breath, to try to make sense of what was happening. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing the old bolt across. For a moment, I simply stood there, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The interior of the station was musty and dark, dust covered every surface and cobwebs hung in the corners. But it was shelter, and for the moment that was all that mattered. I moved further into the station, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. There was an odd desk, its surface littered with long abandoned paperwork. A few chairs were scattered about, and in one corner stood a filing cabinet, drawers hanging open and empty. On a wall, I spotted an old radio. My heart leapt. Maybe, just maybe, I could call for help. I rushed over to it, my fingers fumbling with the dials, but my hope was short-lived. The radio was dead, its components corroded by years of neglect. A heavy thud against the door made me jump. It had found me. I could hear it moving around outside, its irregular footsteps circling the small building. Occasionally it would slam against the walls, testing for weaknesses. I was trapped. The realization settled over me like a physical weight. I was alone in this abandoned outpost with a monster straight out of a nightmare trying to get in. And even if I survived, who would believe me? What rational explanation could there be for what I had seen, what I had experienced? As I stood there, my mind racing for a solution, my eyes fell on something that made my heart skip a beat. Mounted on the wall was an old flare gun, likely left behind when the station was abandoned. It wasn't much, but it was something. A weapon, a chance. I grabbed the flare gun, checking to see if it was loaded. To my relief, there was a single flare inside, one shot. It would have to be enough. As I held the flare gun, the creature outside suddenly went quiet. The silence was almost worse than the sounds of its attempts to break in. I stood there frozen, straining my ears for any hint of its location. Then, with a deafening crash, the door exploded inward. The creature stood in the doorway, its massive frame blocking out what little light filtered through the trees. For a moment, we both remained still, locked in a silent standoff. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged forward. I raised the flare gun and fired. The small cabin erupted in blinding red light as the flare struck the creature square in the chest. It let out another wildly shriek, a sound so high-pitched and unnatural that I felt it more than heard it reverberating through my bone. The creature staggered backward, clawing at the burning flare embedded in its flesh. The acrid smell of burning meat filled the air, mixing with the creature's already putrid stench to create a truly nauseating combination. It didn't fall. Despite the fire burning into its body, the creature kept coming. Its movements were slower now, more pained, but no less determined. I backed away, my mind racing. The flare gun was spent, and I had no other weapons. As I retreated, my back hit the wall. I was cornered with nowhere left to run. The creature advanced, its eyeless face fixed on me, jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. In that moment, facing what I was certain would be my death, something inside me snapped. A primal, desperate need for survival took over. I grabbed the old desk chair and swung it with all my might. The chair connected with the creature's head with a sickening crunch. It stumbled, momentarily stunned. Not wasting a second, I shoved past it, feeling its cold, clammy skin brush against me as I ran out the destroyed doorway. Outside, the forest seemed different. The trees were closer together, their branches reaching down as if trying to grab me. I ran blindly, no longer caring about direction or stealth, driven purely by the need to escape. Behind me, I could hear the creature recovering, its irregular footsteps once again giving chase. But something had changed. Its movements seemed less sure and more pained. The flare and the blow to its head had injured it, slowing it down. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the ache in my muscles. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was survival. As I ran, the forest began to thin out. The ancient twisted trees gave way to younger growth. A glimmer of hope sparked within me. I was getting closer to the edge of this nightmarish section of the forest. Suddenly, I burst out of the trail line onto a familiar trail. Relief flooded through me as I recognized where I was, less than a mile from the main ranger station. Safety was within reach, but my relief was short-lived. A crashing sound from the forest behind me signaled that the creature was still in pursuit. I couldn't stop now. With renewed energy, I sprinted down the trail. Each step brought me closer to safety, to people who could help, to a world that made sense. But each step also reminded me of the horror at my heels, the impossible thing that defied everything I thought I knew about the forest I called home. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw it, the main ranger station. Lights were on inside, a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. I could see figures moving about, my fellow rangers going about their evening routines, blissfully unaware of the nightmare that was unfolding just beyond their sight. I opened my mouth to shout for help, but no sound came out. My throat was raw from running, my voice stolen by fear and exhaustion. I waved my arms frantically as I approached, trying to catch someone's attention. Finally, someone noticed. I saw a figure peer out the window, then rush to the door. As it opened, spouting warm light onto the darkening trail, I allowed myself to believe that I had escaped, that I was safe. But then I heard it, its familiar, irregular gait, much closer than I had realized. I turned, my heart sinking to see the creature emerge from the shadows at the edge of the trail. It stood there, its pale form illuminated by the light from the ranger station. The flare was still burning in its chest, casting an eerie red glow across its grotesque features. Its head was misshapen from where I had struck it, black ichor oozing from a crack in its skull. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I was caught between two worlds, the safe, familiar world of the ranger station and the impossible nightmare embodied by the creature before me. I could hear shouts of alarm from behind me as my colleagues spotted the monster, but they seemed distant, unreal. The creature took a halting step forward, then another. Despite its injuries, it was still coming for me. I braced myself for another desperate fight, knowing that this time there would be witnesses. Whether that would make things better or worse, I couldn't say. But then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. Its eyeless face turned towards the ranger station, regarding the gathering crowd of shocked rangers. It cocked its head to one side in that unsettlingly dog-like manner, as if confused by their presence. Then, with a movement so quick I almost missed it, the creature turned and darted back into the forest. Within seconds it had vanished into the shadows, leaving no trace of its presence save for the lingering stench of decay. I stood there trembling as my fellow rangers rushed to my side. Their voices washed over me asking if I was okay. What had happened? What was that thing? That I couldn't answer. The adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly drained away, leaving me weak and shaky. As I collapsed into the arms of my colleagues, my last conscious thought was of the creature melting back into the forest that had spawned it. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this wasn't over. The nightmare had only just begun. For a moment I allowed myself to hope that it had all been a nightmare. a stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many solitary patrols. But the aches in my body, the cuts and bruises that covered my skin, told a different story. It had been real, all of it. A doctor came in, followed closely by my supervisor, Ranger Garrett. The faces were grim, concern etched into every line. They asked me how I was feeling, ran through a series of tests to check for concussion or other injuries. But I could see the questions burning in their eyes, the need to understand what had happened out there in the woods. When I finally spoke, my voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I told them everything, the missing campers, the strange tracks, the creature that defied explanation. As I talked, I could see the doubt creeping into their expression. Even Garrett, who had seen the creature with his own eyes, seemed skeptical of the full story. "Ryan," he said gently once I had finished my tale, "I know you believe what you're saying, and we all saw something. But what you're describing, it's impossible." "I know how it sounds," I croaked, frustration building in my chest. "But it's what happened. You saw it too, Garrett. You all did." The doctor and Garrett exchanged a look. "We saw something," Garrett admitted. "But it was dark." We were all shocked. "It could have been a bear or a bear or a bear," I interrupted, my voice rising. "A bear that walks on two legs, that's 7 feet tall with no eyes and teeth like needles. I can take a flare to the chest and keep coming." Garrett held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not saying I have all the answers, but there has to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was a person in some kind of costume playing a sick joke." I laughed bitterly. "A joke? People are missing, Garrett. That thing, whatever it was, it killed them, tore them apart." The doctor stepped in then, her voice soothing. "Mr. Holloway, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's not uncommon for the mind to embellish details in times of extreme stress. Perhaps it would be best if you rested for now. We can talk more once you've had time to process everything." I wanted to argue to make them understand, but exhaustion was creeping over me again. As my eyes began to close, I saw Garrett and the doctor step out of the room, talking in low, urgent tones. The next few days passed in a blur of tests, questions, and disbelief. Park rangers, local police, even FBI agents came to interview me. Each time I told my story. And each time I was met with the same mix of concern and skepticism. They had found the campsite just as I had described it, but there was no sign of the bodies I had seen, no trace of the strange tracks that had led me into the deeper woods. The abandoned ranger station showed signs of a struggle, but nothing that couldn't be explained by a confrontation with a large animal. As for the creature itself, the official report labeled it as a large unidentified animal, possibly a bear. My protests fell on deaf ears. Even those who had seen it seemed all too eager to explain it away, forcing it into a framework that made sense in their world. But I knew the truth. I had seen it up close, felt its cold, clammy skin, smelled its putrid stench. That thing was no bear, nor moon animal. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. As the days wore on, I began to doubt myself. Had I imagined it all, or was I losing my mind? The constant questioning, the disbelief in everyone's eyes. It all began to wear me down. But then late one night, as I lay in my hospital bed unable to sleep, a news report caught my attention. A group of hikers had gone missing in a different part of the forest. The reporter described signs of a struggle, strange tracks that local authorities couldn't identify. My blood ran cold. It was happening again. The creature was still out there, still hunting, and no one believed me. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life or pretend everything was normal. I had seen behind the veil, glimpsed a world of nightmares that existed alongside our own, and now I had a responsibility. I had to find that creature, stop it somehow, even if no one believed me, even if it cost me everything. I couldn't let it continue to hunt in my forest. As I lay there planning my next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was embarking on a journey from which there was no return. The forest had changed me, shown me things that I could never unsee, and now it was calling me back. The creature was out there, waiting, and I was the only one who knew the truth. It took weeks of physical therapy and psychological evaluations before they finally released me from the hospital. During that time, I had done my best to play along, to nod and agree when they talked about bears or mountain lions or stress-induced hallucinations. But inside, I was planning. The day I was discharged, I went straight to my small cabin on the outskirts of the forest. It had been my home for the past 6 years, a sanctuary from the noise and chaos of the city. Now it felt different. The woods that surrounded it, once a source of comfort, now loomed ominously, hiding untold secrets in their depths. I spent the next few days gathering supplies, camping gear, first aid kit, extra batteries for my flashlight. I dug out my old hunting rifle from the back of the closet, a relic from my brief stint as a hobby hunter years ago. I wasn't sure if it would be effective against the creature, but it was better than nothing. As I prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. I told myself it was just paranoia, a natural reaction to the trauma I'd experienced, but deep down I knew better. The forest was aware of me and my plans, and it was waiting. Finally, on a cool autumn morning, I set out and had told no one of my intentions, knowing they would try to stop me. As far as the world was concerned, Ryan Holloway was taking some time off to recover from his bear attack. The familiar trails felt different now. Every shadow held potential danger, every unexplained sound a possible threat. I pushed deeper into the forest, beyond the well-trodden paths and into the older growth where I had first encountered the creature. As I walked, I noticed subtle changes in the forest around me. The trees seemed to grow closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more and more sunlight. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the earthy scent of decay. It was as if I were walking into a different world entirely, one that existed alongside our own but followed its own twisted rules. I hadn't seen any sign of the creature, but I could feel its presence. It was out there watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run to the safety of civilization, but I pushed on. I had to know the truth. I had to find a way to stop this thing before it claimed more victims. As night fell, I made camp in a small clearing, the darkness pressing in around me, alive with sounds I couldn't identify. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap, straining my ears for any hint of approach. It was in those long, dark hours that doubt began to creep in. What was I doing out here, alone, hunting a monster that no one else believed in? Was I chasing shadows, tilting at windmills? Or worse, was I simply losing my mind, pursuing a delusion born of trauma and isolation? Then I remembered the missing hikers, the families waiting for answers. I thought of the campers I had failed to save, their mangled bodies half buried in the forest floor. Real or not, something was out there. And I was the only one who knew the truth. As dawn broke, painting the forest in shades of gray and pale gold, I packed up camp and continued my journey. The deeper I went, the more the forest changed. The familiar flora of the Angeles National Forest gave way to plants I didn't recognize, species that shouldn't exist in this part of the world. It was nearing midday when I found the first real sign that I was on the right track. Half hidden beneath a rotting log was a scrap of fabric, the same bright blue as the jacket one of the missing hikers had been wearing. My heart raced as I examined it. The edges were ragged as if they had been torn away by immense strength. I was close. I could feel it. As if in response to my thoughts, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, rifle at the ready, but saw nothing. The forest had gone eerily quiet, the usual background noise of birds and insects suddenly absent. Then I saw it, just a glimpse, a flash of pale, sickly white moving between the trees. My breath caught in my throat as a familiar stench filled the air, the rotting meat smell of the creature. For a moment I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed for flight. But I had come too far to run now. Steadying my nerves, I raised the rifle and moved forward, deeper into the twisted heart of the forest. The hunt was on. As I followed the creature's trail, a chilling thought occurred to me. Was I the hunter or the hunted? The forest seemed to close in around me as I followed the creature's trail. The trees grew denser, their branches twisting together overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. Although light did filter through, cast strange, shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I lost track of time as I pushed deeper into this impossible woodland. Hours blended together, marked only by the gradual dimming of the meager light as day faded into twilight. The air grew thick and heavy, laden with moisture and the ever-present stench of decay. Occasionally I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, or hear the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. But every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. It was as if the creature was toying with me, letting me on a twisted game of cat and mouse through its domain. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds that I couldn't identify. Shrieks and howls echoed through the trees, some distant, others terrifyingly close. More than once, I caught myself wondering if I had made a terrible mistake in coming here alone. But then I would remember the missing hikers, the families waiting for answers, and I would push on. I had to end this one way or another. It was well past midnight when I stumbled into a clearing unlike anything I had seen before. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than any I had ever seen. Their branches reached toward the sky like gnarled fingers, creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. In the center of the clearing stood a massive oak tree, its trunk split open to reveal a dark, yawning cavity. As I approached the tree, the stench of decay grew overwhelming. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bone, that I had found the creature's lair. I raised my rifle, its weight oddly comforting in my hands, and stepped toward the opening. The darkness inside seemed to pulse as if alive. For a moment I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, but I had come too far to back down now. Taking a deep breath, I switched on my flashlight and stepped into the hollow tree. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a scene that defied comprehension. The inside of the tree was far larger than should have been possible, stretching down into the earth like some nightmarish rabbit hole. The walls were lined with a slimy, pulsating substance that seemed to absorb the light. And there, at the bottom of this impossible cavern, stood the creature. It was even more horrifying than I remembered. Its pale, elongated body was covered in fresh scars, including the angry red burn where I had shot it with a flare gun. Its eyeless face turned toward me, mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. For a moment we stood frozen, hunter and hunted, neither moving. Then, with a speed that belied its awkward appearance, the creature lunged. I fired, the sound of the rifle deafening in the confined space. The creature stumbled, but didn't fall. I fired again and again, each shot driving it back, but seemingly causing no lasting damage. As I fumbled to reload, the creature struck. Its clawed hand caught me across the chest, sending me sprawling. My rifle clattered away into the darkness as I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me. The creature loomed over me, its jaw unhinging to reveal that terrible maw. In that moment, faced with my own mortality, time seemed to slow. I saw flashes of my life, my failed marriage, my escape to the forest, the peace I had found here before this nightmare began. But then as the creature lunged for the killing blow, my hand closed around something. A rock, sharp and heavy. With every ounce of strength I had left, I swung. The rock connected with the creature's head with a sickening crunch. It reeled back, black ishor oozing from the wound. Not wasting a second, I scrambled to my feet and charged, tackling the stunned creature. We fell together, tumbling down deeper into the cavern. I found its claws raking my back, smelled its putrid breath, but I held on, grappling with it as we fell. With a bone-jarring impact, we hit the bottom. The creature lay beneath me, momentarily stunned. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed its head and slammed it against the hard earth again and again. The creature's struggles grew weaker with each impact. Finally, with one last terrific effort, I heard a crack. The creature went limp beneath me. For a long moment, I lay there panting, waiting for it to move again. But it remained still. Slowly, disbelievingly, I realized it was over. I had won. As the adrenaline faded, the pain of my injuries hit me. I was bleeding from multiple gashes, and I suspected I had a few broken ribs. But I was alive. Summoning the last of my strength, I began the long, arduous climb out of the cavern. Each movement was agony, but the thought of escaping this nightmare drove me on. When I finally emerged from the hollow tree, the forest seemed different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and I could hear the familiar sounds of birds and insects. It was as if the death of the creature had broken some sort of spell. I stumbled through the woods, only vaguely aware of the direction I was going. My only thought was to get as far away from that clearing as possible. I don't know how long I walked. Hours blended together in a haze of pain and exhaustion, but eventually, I heard voices, human voices. I emerged onto a trail to find a search party. My disappearance had been noticed, and they had come looking for me. The looks on their faces when they saw me, battered, bloody, wild-eyed, told me that I must have been a frightening sight. As they rushed to help me to call for medical evacuation, I tried to tell them about the creature, about the hollow tree. But exhaustion overtook me, and I slipped into unconsciousness. I woke once again in a hospital bed, my body a mass of bandages and pain. The doctors told me I had been unconscious for days, that I was lucky to be alive. They'll spook of animal attacks, of getting lost in the woods, of the dangers of going off trail. I tried to tell them the truth about the creature, about the impossible cavern inside the tree, but I saw the doubt in their eyes, the concerned glances they exchanged. To them, I was just another victim of the forest, my mind addled by fear and isolation. As the days passed and my strength returned, I was visited by park officials, police, even FBI agents. I told my story again and again, but it was clear they didn't believe me. They spoke of mountain lions, of bear attacks, of anything that would fit into their understanding of the world. When I was finally released from the hospital, I returned to my cabin on the edge of the forest. Then everything had changed. The woods that had once been my sanctuary now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow held potential danger. Every unexplained sound a possible threat. I tried to go back to my job as a ranger, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The other rangers treated me differently now, with a mixture of pity and unease. I overheard whispers about PTSD and the dangers of spending too much time alone in the woods. In the end, I decided to leave. I packed up my few belongings and moved back to the city, trading the quiet of the forest for the comforting noise of urban life. But even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, I couldn't escape the memories of what I had seen and experienced. I often found myself wondering about the creature. Had I really killed it? Or was it still out there, waiting in the depths of the forest? Sometimes late at night, I think I can smell that familiar stench of decay and hear the sound of irregular footsteps outside my window. But when I look, there's never anything there. I know the truth of what happened in those woods, even if no one else believes me. I carry the scars, both physical and mental, as proof of my encounter with something that should not exist in our world. And sometimes when the city feels too close, too confining, I find myself looking towards the distant mountains, towards the forest. Part of me wants to go back to seek out the hollow tree to confirm once and for all that the nightmare is truly over. But a larger part knows better. The forest has its secrets, its hidden worlds that exist alongside our own. And some things once seen can never be unseen. So I stay here in the safety of the city, trying to rebuild my life. But always, I keep an eye on the woods, because I know what's out there. But I know that sometimes when you look into the darkness of the forest, something looks back. The dense canopy of the Sipsey wilderness loomed overhead as I guided my truck down the narrow, winding road. It was early May 2023, and the lush greenery of spring was in full force, painting the landscape in vibrant shades of emerald and jade. My name is Ronan Sanders, and at 35 years old, I've been working as a park ranger in this remote corner of Alabama for the better part of a decade. As I navigated the familiar turns, my mind wandered to the events that had led me here. After a string of soul-crushing office jobs in my 20s, I'd stumbled into this career almost by accident. A chance encounter with a retiring ranger at a local bar had planted the seed, and within months I'd traded in my suffocating cubicle for the vast expanse of the wilderness. The radio crackled to life, interrupting my reminiscing. "Ronan, you copy?" It was Veronica, the dispatcher, back at headquarters. "Go ahead," I responded, keeping one hand on the wheel as I reached for the handset. "We've got reports of some illegal hunting activity near Borden Creek. Can you swing by and check it out?" I sighed internally. Illegal hunting wasn't uncommon in these parts, but it always left a sour taste in my mouth. "Roger that," I said. "I'm about 20 minutes out. It'll radio in when I get there." As I hung up the handset, a nagging feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something about this assignment felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I dealt with poachers before, but this time an inexplicable sense of unease crept over me. The road narrowed further as I approached Borden Creek, the trees pressing in on either side like silent sentinels. I parked the truck in a small clearing and grabbed my gear. A sturdy backpack filled with supplies, a first aid kit, and a handheld radio. Standard issue for these types of patrols. As I locked up the vehicle, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the glove compartment where my sidearm was stored. Firearms weren't standard issue for park rangers in this area, but I'd obtained special permission to carry one after a close encounter with an aggressive black bear a few years back. Still, I rarely took it on routine patrols. After a moment's deliberation, I decided against it. This was just a standard check for illegal hunting after all. No need for firepower. With a deep breath, I shouldered my pack and set off into the woods. The well-worn trail quickly gave way to denser undergrowth, and I found myself pushing through thickets of mountain laurel and rhododendron. The sweet scent of blooming wildflowers mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil and decaying leaves. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a wood thrush. Under normal circumstances, I would have reveled in this solitude. It was why I'd chosen this job after all, to escape the chaos of the modern world and find peace in nature's embrace. But today something felt different. The forest seemed too quiet, the shadows a little too deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, observed by unseen eyes hidden in the dense foliage surrounding me. I paused, listening intently, and I thought about the wind in the trees and the distant gurgle of Borden Creek. "Get a grip, Ronan," and I muttered to myself, "You're just jumping because of the poaching reports." As I resumed my hike, I tried to focus on the task at hand, look for signs of illegal hunting, spent shell casings, hidden tree stands, bait piles. But my mind kept wandering, conjuring up images of what might be lurking just beyond my field of vision. It was then that I noticed something odd. A break in the undergrowth, not natural but man-made. A crude path, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. My ranger instincts kicked in, and I crouched down to examine it more closely. Boot prints in the soft earth, partially obscured by fallen leaves, were fresh, maybe a day old at most, and they were heading deeper into the wilderness, away from any marked trails. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. This could be our poachers, I thought, or it could be nothing more than an overzealous hiker who'd strayed off the designated paths. Either way, I had to investigate. With one last glance back towards the safety of the main trail, I set off down the hidden path. The trees seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, scraping against my arms and face. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. As I pushed deeper into the unknown, that nagging feeling of unease blossomed into full-blown anxiety. Something was wrong here, terribly wrong, but I had no idea just how horrific things were about to become. The hidden trail wound its way through the dense forest, growing fainter with each step I took. The big prints I'd been following became more sporadic, obscured by fallen leaves and natural debris on the forest floor. Still, I pressed on, driven by a mix of professional duty and morbid curiosity. After about an hour of hiking, the narrow path opened up into a small clearing. When I saw them, they'd me stop dead in my tracks, my blood running cold despite the warm spring air. It was a campsite, or rather what remained of one. 2 tents lay in tatters, their fabric shredded as if by enormous claws. Sleeping bags and backpacks were strewn about haphazardly, their contents spilled across the forest floor. A portable stove lay overturned near the remnants of a fire pit. Its fuel canister punctured and empty, but it was the eerie silence that struck me most. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing. It was as if all wildlife had fled the area, leaving behind an oppressive, unnatural quiet. I approached the scene cautiously, my senses on high alert. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Park Ranger? Is anyone here?" No response. Not that I'd really expected one. As I surveyed the destruction, my mind raced through possible explanations. A bear attack seemed the most likely culprit, but something didn't add up. The damage was too extensive, too deliberate. And where were the campers? Given at the worst animal attacks I'd seen, there were always remains. I knelt down to examine one of the shredded tents more closely. The tears in the fabric were jagged and uneven, not the clean slices you'd expect from a knife or other blade. Whatever had done this had immense strength and sharp claws or teeth. A glint of metal caught my eye, and I reached down to pick up a small object half buried in the dirt. It was a locket, its delicate chain broken. I pried it open to reveal 2 photos, a smiling young woman with auburn hair on one side and an older couple, presumably her parents, on the other. My stomach churned as I pocketed the locket. This wasn't just some random campsite. These were real people with lives and families, and now they were gone. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, and reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Sanders. Come in." Over. Static crackled for a moment before Veronica's voice came through. "Go ahead, Ronan, what's your status?" I hesitated, unsure of how to describe what I was seeing. I found an abandoned campsite near Borden Creek. Looks like some kind of animal attack. No sign of the campers requesting backup and a search team. There was a pause before Veronica responded, her voice tinged with concern. "Copy that, Ronan. Stay put. I'm sending a team your way. ETA about an hour." "Roger that," I replied. "He'll secure the area and wait for backup." As I clipped the radio back to my belt, my eyes were drawn to something at the edge of the clearing. A trail of broken branches and disturbed underbrush led off into the depths of the forest. Whatever had attacked this campsite had left a clear path in its wake. Every instinct told me to stay put and wait for the search team, but the thought of those missing campers, possibly injured and alone in the wilderness, spurred me into action. I had supplies and first aid training. If there was any chance they were still alive, I had to try to help. With one last look at the devastated campsite, I set off down the new trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming overhead like silent watchers. The light filtering through the canopy took on a sickly green hue, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. As I pushed deeper into the unknown, that feeling of being watched intensified. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see some monstrous form lurking just out of sight. The trail of destruction continued for what felt like miles, though it was hard to judge distance in the dense undergrowth. Broken branches churned up earth, and the occasional scrap of torn clothing marked the path of whatever had come through here. And then, without warning, the trail ended at the base of a massive oak tree. I stood there, panting slightly from the exertion of the hike, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of where the trail might continue. That's when I saw it. A splash of color against the brown and green of the forest floor, partially hidden beneath a fallen log. My heart pounding, I approached slowly, already dreading what I might find. As I drew closer, the shape resolved itself into a horrifying tableau. It was a body, or what was left of one. The victim lay face down, their limbs splayed at unnatural angles, their clothing in tatters and exposed skin. I lurched away, barely making it to a nearby bush before emptying the contents of my stomach. The acrid taste of bile filled my mouth as I retched, my mind reeling from what I'd just seen. Once the nausea subsided, I forced myself to look again, to take in the details I'd need from my report. The body, I couldn't even tell if it was male or female, had been brutalized beyond recognition. Deep gashes crisscrossed the exposed flesh, but they weren't clean cuts. The edges were ragged, torn, as if something had ripped into the victim with inhuman strength. But it was the lack of blood that truly unsettled me. Despite the severity of the wounds, there was almost no blood at the scene. It was as if the victim had been drained dry before being discarded like a broken toy. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio once more. "Dispatch," I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I found a body. Send everyone. Send them now." I didn't wait for a response. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the gruesome scene before me. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't the work of any animal I knew. This was something else entirely. As the reality of the situation sank in, a primal fear began to bubble up from deep within me. Whatever had done this was still out there, possibly hunting for its next victim. And I was alone in the wilderness, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a multi-tool. A twig snapped somewhere in the underbrush behind me, and I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The forest had gone deathly quiet again, but now the silence felt oppressive, threatening. Something was out there, watching, waiting. And I had the sickening feeling that I was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The search and rescue team arrived, followed closely by local law enforcement and a team of forensic experts. The serene forest clearing had been transformed into a bustling crime scene, awash with the harsh glare of floodlights and the constant chatter of radios. I found myself seated on the tailgate of one of the emergency vehicles. A shock blanket draped over my shoulders despite the warm evening air. A cup of lukewarm coffee sat untouched in my hands as I stared blankly at the controlled chaos unfolding before me. "Ranger Sanders," a voice pulled me from my daze. I looked up to see a woman in her mid-40s with short graying hair and sharp green eyes. She wore plain clothes, but the badge clipped to her belt identified her as law enforcement. "And Detective Evelyn Marsh, I need to ask you a few questions about what you found here." I nodded, setting aside the untouched coffee. "Of course, Detective, where would you like me to start?" She pulled out a small notebook and pen. "From the beginning, walk me through everything you saw and did today." no matter how insignificant it might seem. So I did. I recounted my assignment to check on reports of illegal hunting, my discovery of the hidden trail, and the devastated campsite. When I got to the part about finding the body, my voice faltered, and I had to take a moment to compose myself. Detective Marsh listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she looked up at me with a mixture of sympathy and professional detachment. That's quite an ordeal you've been through, Ranger. Now, in your professional opinion, what kind of animal do you think could have done this? I shook my head. Honestly, Detective, I have no idea. I've seen bear attacks, big cat attacks. This was something different. The level of violence, the apparent strength involved, it doesn't match anything I'm familiar with. She raised an eyebrow at that. Are you suggesting this wasn't an animal attack? I'm not suggesting anything, I said quickly. I'm just saying I've never seen an animal cause this kind of damage. The wall of the campsite was torn apart. The stain of the body, it almost seemed deliberate, you know? Like whatever did this wasn't just hunting for food. Detective Marsh's expression turned thoughtful. I see. Well, we'll have to wait for the forensics team to complete their analysis before we can draw any conclusion. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you could stick around. One may have more questions as the investigation progresses. I nodded, suppressing a shudder at the thought of spending more time in these woods. Of course, whatever I can do to help. As Detective Marsh walked away, I found my gaze drawn back to the forest. The floodlights cast long shadows among the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the circle of light, watching and waiting. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. More bodies were discovered, 5 in total, including the one I'd found. All showed signs of the same brutal violence, and all were in various states of decay, suggesting the attacks had been occurring over several weeks. The media descended on our quiet corner of Alabama like vultures, their vans clogging the narrow forest roads and their cameras peering into every shadow. Wild theories began to circulate. A deranged serial killer, an escaped government experiment, even talk of some cryptozoological monster. Throughout all, I found myself unable to sleep, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures stalking through the trees and the sightless eyes of mutilated corpses. Even when I was awake, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of some malevolent presence lurking just out of sight. It was on the 4th day of the investigation that Detective Marsh approached me again. She looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes and a grim set to her mouth. "Ranger Sanders, can I have a word?" she asked, gesturing for me to follow her away from the bustling command center. Once we were out of earshot, she turned to me with a serious expression. "I need your help with something, but I need you to keep it quiet. Can I trust you?" I nodded, intrigued and a little wary. "Of course, Detective, what's going on?" She glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard before continuing. "The forensics team found something unusual at one of the crime scenes. Tracks that don't match any known animal species, and fibers caught on some tree bark that they can't identify." My heart rate quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever did this might not be something we're equipped to handle," she said quietly. "I've got a friend at the FBI, someone who deals with unusual cases. I'm thinking of calling him in, but I wanted to get your take on it first. He knows these woods better than anyone." I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. "Detective, I've spent nearly a decade in this wilderness. I thought I knew every inch of it, every animal that called it home. But what I saw out there doesn't make sense. If you got someone who might be able to shed some light on this, I think you should call them." Detective Marsh nodded, a look of relief crossing her face. "I'm glad you agree. I'll make the call. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me. I want you to go back out there, retrace your steps, see if you can find anything we might have missed. But be careful, Ronan. Whatever did this is still out there." I swallowed hard, fighting back the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. I understand. Where do you want me to go? First light tomorrow, she replied. Rather, don't tell anyone else about this. The last thing we need is panic spreading through the search teams. As I lay in my tent that night, sleep eluded me. The forest outside seemed alive with whispers and shadows, every rustle of leaves sounding like footsteps creeping ever closer. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with monstrous shapes and echoes of distant, inhuman screams. The pre-dawn light cast an eerie glow over the misty forest as I set out the next morning. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. I'd earned myself this time my service pistol, a reassuring weight on my hip, though I doubted its effectiveness against whatever creature we were dealing with. I retraced my steps from that first fateful day, pushing through the dense underbrush. The hidden trail I discovered was now well worn from the constant traffic of investigators and search teams. But as I moved deeper into the wilderness, beyond the areas that had been thoroughly searched, the forest began to reclaim its secrets. Hours passed as I meticulously combed the area, searching for any clue that might have been overlooked. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth barely penetrating the thick canopy overhead. I was about to call it quits and head back when something caught my eye. A flash of white against the dark forest floor, partially hidden beneath a fallen log. I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to rest on my holstered weapon. As I drew closer, I realized what I was looking at. No, but these weren't the bones of a deer or any other forest animal I was familiar with. They were too large, too human-like. With trembling hands, I brushed away the layer of leaves and debris covering them. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. It was a skull unmistakably human, but grotesquely deformed. The cranium was elongated, the eye sockets too large and angled, the jaw distended, filled with teeth that were wickedly sharp and not too numerous. That wasn't just some unfortunate camper who had fallen victim to our mysterious predator. This was something else entirely. I fumbled for my radio, my eyes never leaving the horrific discovery before me. Detective Marsh, come in. This is Ranger Sanders. I found something big. Study crackled for a moment before her voice came through. Go ahead, Ronan, what have you got? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat. The sound echoed through the forest, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me, followed by a high-pitched keening that sent shivers down my spine. Ronan, are you there? Detective Marsh's voice seemed to come from very far away. It's here, I whispered into the radio, my eyes scanning the surrounding forest. Oh God, it's here. The underbrush to my left exploded outward as something massive burst into the clearing. I caught a glimpse of pale, leathery skin of limbs too long and joints bent at impossible angles and eyes glowing with an intelligence that was terrifyingly alien. I don't think I ran crashing through the forest, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. I fled in blind panic. The creature pursued, its inhuman shrieks echoing through the trees. I could hear it behind me, gaining ground with each passing second. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me onward. I vaulted over fallen logs, splashed through shallow streams, always with the sound of my pursuer close behind. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that frenzied flight. But eventually, my foot caught on an exposed root. I went down hard, tumbling down a steep embankment. I came to rest at the bottom, dazed and battered. As I struggled to regain my senses, I realized I'd fallen into some kind of ravine. Steep rock walls rose on either side, and a narrow stream trickled along the bottom. For a moment, all was quiet. Then I heard it, the scrape of claws on stone. The heavy breathing of something large descending the ravine wall. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my battered body. My hand went to my hip and my heart sank as I realized my pistol was gone, lost somewhere in my headlong flight through the forest. The creature dropped into the ravine behind me, its massive form blocking out what little light filtered down from above. For the first time, I got a clear look at what had been terrorizing these woods. It was vaguely humanoid, standing easily 8 feet tall, even with its hunched posture. Its skin was a pale, sickly gray, stretched taut over a frame that seemed to be all angles and sharp edges. Long, wickedly clawed hands dangled nearly to the ground. And its face, God, its face was the stuff of nightmares. A distended jaw filled with needle-sharp teeth, eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, and a misshapen cranium that pulsed obscenely. As it advanced on me, saliva dripping from its maw, I knew with certainty that I was about to die. Time seemed as slow as the creature stalked toward me, its movements a horrifying blend of animal grace and unnatural angles. My back pressed against the cold stone of the ravine wall, and then I realized with sickening clarity that there was nowhere left to run. In that moment of absolute terror, an odd calm settled over me. If this was to be my end, I would face it with whatever dignity I could muster. I straightened up, meeting the creature's glowing eyes with as steady a gaze as I could manage. "What are you?" I found myself asking, my voice barely above a whisper. To my utter shock, the creature paused, its head tilted to one side in an almost quizzical manner, and a series of clicks and guttural sounds emerged from its throat. Was it trying to communicate? Before I could process this bizarre turn of events, a deafening roar filled the ravine. The creature's head snapped up, its attention drawn to something beyond my field of vision. Without warning, it leapt straight up the ravine wall, disappearing from sight with inhuman speed and agility. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The sound of approaching voices snapped me back to reality. Vernon, are you down there?" It was Detective Marsh, her voice edged with panic. "Here," I called back, my own voice hoarse and shaky. "I'm down here." Within minutes, rescue ropes were being lowered into the ravine. As I was pulled to safety, I found myself surrounded by a team of heavily armed men in black tactical gear. They weren't local law enforcement or even state police. These were federal agents, and they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Detective Marsh rushed over as soon as my feet touched solid ground. "Thank God you're all right," she said, relief evident in her voice. "What happened? Did you see it?" I nodded, still too shaken to form coherent sentences. The tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, his bearing clearly marking him as the one in charge. "Ranger Sanders," he said, his voice carrying a note of authority. "I'm Special Agent Gabriel Reyes. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw down there." Over the next hour, I recounted my terrifying encounter in painstaking detail. Agent Reyes listened intently, his expression betraying nothing. When I finished, he exchanged a significant look with Detective Marsh. "Ranger Sanders," he said, turning back to me. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Can I trust you to keep this information confidential?" I nodded, a sense of unreality settling over me. What had I stumbled into? "The creature you encountered is not unknown to us," Agent Reyes continued. "We've been tracking reports of similar entities across the country for years. We believe they're not from this world, or at least not from this version of it." My mind reeled. "Are you saying aliens?" Agent Reyes shook his head. "No, exactly. Our working theory is that these creatures come from a parallel dimension, one that occasionally bleeds into our own. We call them interlopers." The implications of what he was saying were staggering. "But why are they here? What do they want?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," he replied grimly. "Sometimes they seem to be simply exploring or hunting. Other times, well, let's just say their intentions appear far more sinister. As the full weight of these revelations settled on me, I felt a mix of terror and strange exhilaration. The world was far bigger and more mysterious than I had ever imagined. What happens now? I asked. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of debriefings, training sessions, and mind-bending revelations. I was introduced to a world hidden just beneath the surface of everyday reality. A world where the impossible was commonplace and the dangers were beyond imagination. Agent Reyes and his team set up a command center in an abandoned ranger station deep in the Sipsey wilderness. From there, we coordinated our efforts to track and contain the interloper threat. I threw myself into the work, desperate to understand these creatures and the threat they posed. Late nights were spent pawing over case files detailing encounters from across the globe. The more I learned, the more I realized how little we truly knew. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Detective Marsh found me, my desk littered with reports and blurry photographs. "You should get some rest, Ronan," she said, concern evident in her voice. "You're no good to anyone if you burn yourself out." I'm all back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. I know, it's just that the more I dig into this, the more questions I have. These interlopers, they're not just mindless beasts, they're intelligent, maybe even more so than us. But their motives, their behavior, it's so alien. Evelyn nodded, pulling up a chair beside me. That's what makes them so dangerous. We can predict them, can't reason with them, at least not in any way we've discovered yet. The thought that had been nagging at me for days finally bubbled to the surface. Evelyn, how long has the FBI known about these things? And why haven't they gone public? People deserve to know what's out there. She sighed, her expression turning grim. That's complicated, Ronnie. The government has known about the interlopers for decades, maybe even longer. But going public, can you imagine the panic it would cause, the breakdown of society? I could see her point, but something still didn't sit right. So we just let people wander into the wilderness, oblivious to the danger. "We do what we can," she replied. "We monitor hotspots, we intervene when necessary. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do for now." Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. We rushed to the window to see Agent Reyes sprinting towards the command center, his face a mask of urgency. He announced as he burst through the door, "We've got a problem." Our sensors have picked up a massive spike in interdimensional energy about 10 miles north of here. When I was coming through, it's big. The next hours were a blur of activity as we mobilized for what could be our biggest encounter yet. As I geared up, strapping on body armor and checking my weapons, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were woefully unprepared for what awaited us. A convoy of black SUVs tore through the forest roads, guided by the steadily increasing readings on our sensors. As we neared the epicenter of the anomaly, the very air seemed to thicken, charged with an otherworldly energy that made my skin crawl. We arrived at a large clearing to find a sight that defied description. The air shimmered and twisted, reality itself seeming to warp and bend. And emerging from this distortion were shapes, dark, writhing forms that hurt the eyes to look upon. My God, Agent Reyes breathed beside me. It's a full-scale incursion. As if in response to his words, the largest of the shapes solidified into a form that dwarfed even the interloper I had encountered in the ravine. It was a mass of twisting limbs and pulsating flesh, its very presence seeming to distort the world around it. And then it spoke, its voice resonating not through the air, but directly in our minds. "We have come," it intoned, the words carrying a weight of alien intelligence and unfathomable purpose. "Your world is now up." As the enormity of the threat before us sank in, I realized that everything I thought I knew about our reality, about my place in the universe, was about to change forever. The true battle for our world was about to begin, and I was standing on the front lines. The clearing erupted into chaos as the FBI team sprang into action. Agent Reyes barked orders, coordinating our defense against the otherworldly invasion. Weapons were raised. Their reports thundered through the forest as we opened fire on the emerging interlopers, but our bullets seemed to have little effect. They passed through the writhing forms as if they were made of smoke, occasionally eliciting shrieks of pain or annoyance, but doing no lasting damage. "Fall back, Reyes," shouted over the din. "Regroup at the tree line." As we retreated, I noticed something odd. The smaller interlopers, similar to the one I had encountered in the ravine, were not attacking us directly. Instead, they seemed to be preparing something. They moved with purpose, arranging themselves in a complex pattern around the massive entity that had spoken to us. Detective Marsh appeared at my side, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Groaning," she said, pointing towards the center of the clearing. The air was shimmering more intensely now, the fabric of reality stretching and tearing. Through the widening gap, I caught glimpses of a world beyond, a hellish landscape of twisted geometry and impossible colors. "They're trying to open a permanent gateway," Agent Reyes said, his voice grim. "If they succeed, there'll be no stopping them." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of our world, and we seemed hopelessly outmatched. But as I watched the interlopers work, a wild idea began to form in my mind. "The pattern," I said, turning to Reyes. "They're arranging themselves in a specific pattern to open the gate. What if we disrupt it?" Reyes' eyes widened as he grasped my meaning. "It could work, but we need to get close, too close." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to propose. "He'll do it. I've been closer to these things than anyone. Maybe I can get through." "Absolutely not," Evelyn interjected. "It's suicide." But Reyes was already nodding. "It might be our only chance, but you won't go alone." He turned to the team. "I need volunteers for a high-risk operation." To my surprise and gratitude, hands went up immediately. Within minutes, a small strike team had been assembled. As we prepared to make our desperate push, I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Ronan," Evelyn said, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. "Be careful out there." I nodded, trying to muster a confident smile. "I'll do my best." With a final nod to Agent Reyes, our small team broke from cover and charged towards the center of the clearing. The world around us erupted into chaos as the interlopers realized our intent. Tendrils of otherworldly energy lashed out. The air itself seemed to resist our advance. I pushed forward, my focus narrowed to the task at hand, the pattern. We had to disrupt the pattern. As we neared the inner circle of interlopers, I could feel the alien presence pressing against my mind, trying to overwhelm me with images and sensations no human was meant to comprehend. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to keep moving. One of our team members went down, his scream cut short as he was enveloped by a writhing mass of tentacles. Another fell moments later, her body contorting in impossible ways as the alien influence took hold. But we were close now, so close. With a final burst of speed, I hurled myself at the nearest interloper. Its skin was cold and slick beneath my hands, its form shifting and writhing as I grappled with it. The world around me faded away, my entire existence narrowed to this one desperate act. I don't know how long the struggle lasted. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that hellish melee. But suddenly I felt something give way. The interloper beneath me let out a shriek that threatened to shatter my eardrums. And then, silence. I found myself lying on the forest floor, gasping for breath. Around me, the other survivors of our strike team were slowly picking themselves up, looks of disbelief on their faces. The clearing was empty. The interlopers, the massive entity, and the shimmering portal, all gone as if they had never been. Agent Reyes approached, his normally stoic expression replaced by one of awe. "You did it," he said, helping me to my feet. "Somehow you actually did it." As the reality of our victory sank in, the wave of exhaustion washed over me. We had won. but at what cost? And how long before they tried again? The days following our confrontation with the interlopers were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. The official story released to the public spoke of a toxic chemical spill explaining away the deaths and strange occurrences in the wilderness. But for those of us who knew the truth, life would never be the same. A week after the incident, I found myself standing at the edge of the clearing where it had all gone down. The forest had already begun to reclaim the space, new growth sprouting from the scarred earth. Nature seemed eager to erase all traces of the otherworldly incursion. Penny, for your thoughts. I turned to see Evelyn approaching, the thermos in her hand. She poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to me. I was thinking about how quickly things can change, I said, taking a sip of the hot liquid. A month ago, my biggest worry was illegal hunting, no? She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Now you're a defender of reality itself. I chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Something like that. How do you do it, Evelyn? How do you go back to a normal life after seeing what we've seen? She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. You don't, she finally said. Not really, but you learn to carry it with you, to use what you know to make a difference. Even if most people will never understand, we stood in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the forest. As the shadows lengthened, I felt a familiar prickle in the back of my neck, that sense of being watched that had become all too familiar. They're still out there, aren't they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Evelyn nodded. They are. What we stopped here was just one incursion. There'll all be others. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Then I guess we better be ready for them. As if in response to my words, a distant howl echoed through the trees. Not quite animal, not quite human. A reminder that the boundary between worlds was thinner than most people realized. Evelyn and I exchanged a look, then began making our way back to the command center. There was work to be done, a world to protect. And I, Ronnie Sanders, once a simple park ranger, now found myself on the front lines of a war that most of humanity would never know existed. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance back at the darkening forest. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of movement among the trees, a shape that defied natural explanation. But there it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had been real or just a trick of the fading light. One thing was certain, life would never be simple again. But as I looked at Evelyn at the determined set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, I knew I wasn't facing this new reality alone. Together we would stand guard against the darkness, protecting the thin veil that separated our world from the horrors that lurked beyond. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be losses along the way. But it was a fight worth having, a purpose that gave meaning to the terrifying knowledge we now possessed. As we reached the command center, Agent Reyes met us at the door, his expression grave. We've got reports of unusual activity in the Ozarks, he said, without preamble. Looks like our friends might be testing the waters again. I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. When do we leave? Reyes allowed himself a small smile. First flight tomorrow, get some rest, both of you. Something tells me we're gonna need it. I was there prepared for bed that night. My mind raced with thoughts of what the future might hold. The world had changed, or perhaps it was just my perception of it. Either way, there was no going back. I drifted off to sleep with the weight of my new responsibility heavy on my mind, but also with a sense of purpose I had never known before. In the darkness beyond our reality, ancient and alien intelligences plotted and schemed. That as long as there were people willing to stand against them, humanity had a fighting chance. And I, Ronan Sanders, former park ranger turned interdimensional defender, would be there on the front lines, ready to face whatever horrors the multiverse might throw our way. There is a fine line between a good day in the field and a day that goes to hell. I did plenty of the first kind, enough to think maybe I was overdue for the latter. The year was 2024, and I'd been working as a park ranger in the Adirondacks for over 2 decades at that point. At 52, I thought I'd seen it all: lost hikers, animal attacks, even the occasional drug operation hidden deep in the woods. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. The morning started like any other. I woke up in my small cabin on the edge of the park, made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and settled in to review the day's assignments. That's when the call came in. "Hey Russ," came the gravelly voice of Gary, another ranger I'd worked with for years. "We've got a situation." I sighed, taking another sip of coffee. "What kind of situation?" "Missing hikers. A couple checked in at the visitor station 2 days ago, but never made it back to their car." I frowned. It wasn't uncommon for hikers to get lost, but 2 days was pushing it. "Where were they headed?" "That's the thing," Gary replied, his voice tight. "They were planning to explore Section 7. My stomach dropped. Section 7 was a remote part of the park that didn't see many visitors. Dense forest, overgrown paths, unexpected cliffs. It was challenging terrain even for experienced hikers. And the lack of cell reception made it a nightmare for search and rescue operations." "Any idea why they chose that area?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. Apparently they were experienced hikers looking for a challenge. "But Russ, there's something else." I paused, my hand on my backpack. "What?" Gary hesitated. "There have been 2 reports of strange sightings in that area. Probably nothing, but I knew Gary well enough to know he wasn't one for flights of fancy. If he was concerned, there was a reason." "He'll check it out," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Send only their last known coordinates." As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine search and rescue. Little did I know how right I was. The drive to the trailhead was tense. I kept replaying Gary's words in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Strange sightings? In all my years as a ranger, I'd heard my share of campfire stories and urban legends. But Gary wasn't the type to buy into that nonsense. I parked my truck and double-checked my gear. Water, first aid kit, emergency rations, flares, radio. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my sidearm. It wasn't standard procedure for a search and rescue, but something in Gary's voice had me on edge. The trail started innocently enough. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappled the forest floor. Birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. But as I pushed deeper into Section 7, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the light. The cheerful bird song faded, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under my boots. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, carrying a musty scent that reminded me of decay. About an hour into the hike, I began to feel watched. There wasn't the usual sense of animals observing an intruder in their territory. This felt more deliberate, almost predatory. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, my hand straying to the gun at my hip. "Good a grip, Russ," I muttered to myself. "You're letting Gary's ghost stories get to you." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong in these woods. I pushed on, following the coordinates Gary had sent. The couple's planned route would have taken them deep into the heart of Section 7, through some of the most challenging terrain in the park. As I hiked, I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of recent human activity: broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, anything that might indicate someone had passed through recently. What I found instead sent a chill down my spine. About 2 miles in, I came across a small clearing. At first glance, nothing seemed to miss. But as I scanned the area, something caught my eye. Half hidden under a pile of leaves was a backpack. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert. The backpack was high-end, the kind serious hikers use. It was partially unzipped, its contents spilling out onto the forest floor. I crouched down to examine it, and my blood ran cold. The backpack was torn, not in the way that comes from normal wear and tear, but as if something with incredibly sharp claws had ripped into it. And there, on the forest floor next to a scattered array of energy bars and water bottles, was a dark stain that could only be blood. I keyed my radio. Gary, it's Rust. I found something, sending coordinates now. As I waited for a response, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in that clearing. The silence of the forest seemed to press in around me, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. And then, just at the edge of my hearing, came a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl that no animal I knew could make. I spun around, my hand on my gun, but the clearing was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was stronger than ever. Whatever was out there, I realized with growing dread, it wasn't finished, and I had just walked right into its territory. With shaking hands, I unholstered my weapon, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The growl had faded, but the oppressive silence that followed was almost worse. I knew deep in my bones that I was being stalked. "Gary, come in," I whispered into my radio, not daring to raise my voice. Static was my only reply. Cursing under my breath, I began to move. Standing still felt like painting a target on my back. I needed to find higher ground, somewhere I could get a better view of my surroundings and maybe re-establish radio contact. As I moved, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of the missing hikers. The backpack was a bad sign, but until I found bodies, there was still hope. It was a slim hope, growing slimmer by the minute, but it was all I had to cling to. The terrain grew more challenging as I ascended. The path, already overgrown, seemed to disappear entirely at times. I found myself scrabbling over moss-covered rocks and ducking under low-hanging branches. All the while, that feeling of being watched never left me. About a half-mile from where I'd found the backpack, I came across something that made my stomach lurch. A torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush was vibrant blue, the kind of color you'd see on high-end hiking gear. It was stained with what could only be blood. I carefully removed it from the bush, my mind racing. The fabric was still damp, the blood not fully dried. Whatever had happened, it had been recent. That's when I heard it, a scream, high and desperate, echoing through the trees. It was distant, but unmistakably human and unmistakably terrified. Without thinking, I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush in the direction of the sound. My logical brain screamed at me to slow down, to approach cautiously, but instinct and adrenaline had taken over. I burst through a thick stand of pines into another clearing, and the sight that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. There, propped against a gnarled old oak, was a body. A man dressed in hiking gear, his clothes torn and bloodied. It was his face that drew my horrified gaze. Or rather, what was left of it, something had torn into him with savage fury, leaving deep, ragged gashes across his features. His eyes stared sightlessly at the canopy above, frozen in an expression of terror. I approached slowly, my gun held ready. As a ranger, I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something different. The wounds were too precise, too calculated. This wasn't a predator killing for food. This was something else entirely. As I crouched beside the body, I noticed something clutched in the man's hand. With a growing sense of dread, I pried his stiff fingers open. It was a camera, digital, high-end. The screen was cracked, but as I pressed the power button, it flickered to life. What I saw in those photos would haunt me for the rest of my life. The first few were normal enough, scenic views of the forest, selfies of a smiling couple, but then they changed. Blurry images of something moving in the trees. a dark shape too large to be human, with glowing eyes reflecting the camera's flash. And the final image, I nearly dropped the camera when I saw it. It showed a creature caught in mid-leap towards the camera. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, massive, with matted fur and elongated limbs that ended in wickedly curved claws. Its face was a nightmarish blend of bear and wolf, with a mouthful of teeth that seemed too large, too numerous. But it was the eyes that chilled me to my core. There was an intelligence there, a malevolence that spoke of something far worse than any natural predator. As I stared at the image, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, a twig snapped behind me. I walled around, gun raised, to find myself face to face with the very creature from the photo. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its massive form hunched and ready to spring. Those intelligent, malevolent eyes locked onto mine, and I knew with certainty that I was looking at death itself. In that moment, as the creature's lips pulled back in a snarl that was almost a grin, I realized that I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, that I might not make it out of these woods alive. Time seemed to freeze as I locked eyes with the creature. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I knew that any sudden movement would trigger its predatory response. So I stood my ground, gun trained on its massive head, breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The creature tilted its head almost curiously, its nostrils flared, taking in my scent. I could see its muscles tensing beneath its matted fur, preparing to pounce. In that split second before it moved, I fired. The gunshot shattered the unnatural silence of the forest. The creature jerked back, a spray of blood erupting from its shoulder. But instead of falling or fleeing, it let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath my feet. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as I could hear the creature's thunderous footfalls behind me. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step. But I didn't dare slow down. The sound of the creature's labored breathing, punctuated by guttural snarls, spurred me on. I had no plan, no destination in mind. And my only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. But as I ran, a small part of my mind that wasn't consumed by blind panic realized I was making a fatal mistake. I was letting the creature drive me deeper into its territory, away from any hope of rescue. I needed to change direction to try and circle back towards the trail. But every time I tried to veer off, the creature would put on a burst of speed, herding me back onto my current path. It was toying with me, I realized with growing horror. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a game. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I pushed on. I could hear a sound in the distance, the rush of water, a river. If I could reach it, maybe I could. My thoughts were cut short as my foot caught on an exposed root. I went down hard, tumbling down a short, steep incline. Pain exploded in my ankle as I landed, and I knew immediately it was, if not broken, at least badly sprained. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stabbing pain, and looked up. The creature stood at the top of the incline, its massive form silhouetted against the dim forest light. It made no move to come after me. Instead, it just watched. That's when I realized why it had been hurting me in this direction. I was trapped. I turned slowly, confirming my worst fears. I stood on a narrow ledge, the churning waters of a river far below. The ledge extended in either direction, but it was narrow, treacherous. In my current state, with a damaged ankle, attempting to navigate it would be suicidal. I turned back to face the creature, raising my gun once more. It was my last stand, and we both knew it. But as I steadied my aim, something unexpected happened. The creature's form began to shift, its outline blurred, its massive bulk seeming to collapse in on itself. I blinked. Sure, I was hallucinating from fear and exhaustion. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. In its place stood a man, or at least something that looked like a man. He was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long for his body. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his gaunt frame in rags. It was his face that drew my horrified gaze. It was as if someone had taken human features and rearranged them slightly. His eyes were too far apart, his mouth too wide, and when he smiled, oh God, when he smiled, I saw rows of teeth that no human mouth should contain. Well now, he said, his voice a low rasp that sent shivers down my spine. Isn't this interesting? I kept my gun trained on him, though my hands shook so badly I doubt I could have hit him if I tried. What are you? I managed to choke out. His grin widened, impossibly wide. I'm hungry, he said simply. And then he began to walk towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I fired once, twice, 3 times. The bullets seemed to pass right through him, leaving no mark. He kept coming. As he reached for me with hands that were slowly morphing back into claws, I made a split-second decision. I turned and jumped off the ledge, plunging towards the churning river below. The last thing I heard before the water closed over my head was his laughter echoing off the canyon walls. I don't know how long I was in the water. The current was strong, tossing me about like a rag doll. Every time I managed to surface, gasping for air, I'd be pulled under again. My lungs burned, my limbs felt like lead, and the cold, God, the cold was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, when the darkness at the edges of my vision threatened to consume me entirely, I felt something solid beneath my feet. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself onto a rocky shore, collapsing in a heap of exhaustion and pain. I lay there for what felt like hours, shivering uncontrollably, too weak to move. The sound of the river rushing by mingled with the pounding of blood in my ears. Every breath was an effort, my chest heaving as I coughed up river water. As my senses slowly returned, I became aware of my surroundings. I was on a narrow strip of shore, hemmed in on one side by the river and on the other by steep, rocky cliffs. The forest loomed above, dark and forbidding. With trembling hands, I checked myself for injuries. My ankle was definitely sprained, possibly broken. Cuts and bruises covered my arms and legs, and my ribs ached with every breath. But I was alive. Somehow, I was alive. My relief was short-lived as the memory of what had chased me into the river came flooding back. That creature, that thing that looked like a man but wasn't, was it still out there hunting me? I forced myself to my feet, fighting back a cry of pain as I put weight on my injured ankle. I had lost my backpack in the river along with my radio and gun. I was alone, injured, and unarmed in a wilderness that suddenly seemed far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full weight of my situation hit me. I was lost, with no way to call for help. Night was falling, and with it the temperature was dropping rapidly. If I didn't find shelter soon, hypothermia would become a very real threat. But the alternative, going back into those woods, filled me with a primal terror I had never experienced before. The memory of those inhuman eyes, that impossibly wide grin full of sharp teeth, made my blood run cold. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to think rationally. The river had carried me some distance downstream, which meant I was likely outside of the creature's immediate territory. If I could follow the river, I might be able to find my way back to civilization. With no other choice, I began to limp along the shoreline, using the cliff wall for support. Every step was agony, but the alternative, staying put and waiting for that thing to find me, was unthinkable. As I walked, the events of the day played over and over in my mind. The torn backpack, the mutilated body, the terrifying chase through the woods. None of it made sense. In all my years as a ranger, I had never encountered anything like this. What was that creature? How could it change its form? And why was it hunting humans? Night fell quickly, plunging the canyon into darkness. The temperature dropped rapidly, and my wet clothes clung to my skin, leaching away what little warmth I had left. I knew I needed to find shelter, but the narrow strip of shore offered no protection from the elements. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any further, I spotted something ahead. A dark opening in the cliff face, a cave. It was small, barely more than a crevice, but it would provide some shelter from the wind and cold. I dragged myself into the cave, collapsing onto the rocky floor. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized I wasn't alone. There, huddled in the back of the cave, was a woman. Her eyes were wide with fear as she stared at me, her body tense and ready to flee. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair matted with leaves and dirt. Her clothes were torn and muddy, and she clutched a makeshift weapon, a sharp rock, in her trembling hands. "It's okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." She didn't lower her weapon, but some of the tension left her body. Are you human?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question sent a chill down my spine. "Yes," I replied. "Are you one of the missing hikers?" She nodded slowly. "Her name's Kira, and my boyfriend and we were attacked by something. I don't know what it was. It looked like a man, but then it changed." I moved closer, wincing at the pain in my ankle. "I know. I saw it too. What happened to your boyfriend?" Kira's eyes filled with tears. "I took him. I ran. I'd been hiding ever since. I thought it was coming for me when I heard you." I reached out, gently taking the rock from her hand. "It's okay. You're safe now. We're gonna get out of here." As Kira calmed down, we exchanged stories. She and her boyfriend Tyler had been experienced hikers looking for a challenge. They had heard rumors of strange sightings in Section 7 and had been curious, but nothing could have prepared them for what they encountered. "It was like something out of a nightmare," Kira said, hugging her knees to her chest. "One moment we were setting up camp, and the next this thing was there. It moved so fast." Tyler pushed me out of the way, told me to run. I heard him screaming as I fled. I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing. If you had stayed, you both would have been killed." As we talked, I assessed our situation. We were both injured and exhausted. Kira had been surviving on berries and stream water for the past 2 days. Neither of us was in any condition to attempt a difficult trek through the wilderness. "We need to rest," I said finally. "In the morning, we'll follow the river. It has to lead somewhere, and it's our best chance of getting out of here." Instead, I said, "Well, take turns keeping watch, and at the first sign of danger, well, run." The night was eerily quiet, broken only by the sound of the river and the occasional hoot of an owl. I found myself straining my ears for any sound that might indicate the creature was nearby. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. But as the hours ticked by, nothing appeared. As dawn began to break, casting a pale light into our small cave, I woke Kira. We needed to move. We had to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. "Ready?" I asked as we stood at the cave entrance, peering out at the misty morning. Kira nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Let's go." Together we stepped out of the cave and into the unknown, hoping against hope that we would find our way back to safety. The morning air was crisp and cool as we made our way along the riverbank. The mist hanging over the water gave everything another worldly quality, as if we had stepped into some strange primordial landscape. Kira and I moved slowly, both of us nursing injuries. My ankle throbbed with every step, and Kira had a nasty gash on her leg that she had bandaged with strips torn from her shirt. But we pushed on, driven by the need to escape this nightmare. As we walked, I tried to piece together what we knew. There was something in these woods, something that could change its shape at will. It was intelligent, cunning, and it was hunting humans. But why? And how long had it been here, preying on unsuspecting hikers? "Do you think there are more of them?" Kira asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at me. I shook my head. "I don't know, but if there were, wouldn't we have heard about more disappearances, more sightings?" Kira frowned. Unless they're very good covering their tracks. The thought sent a chill down my spine. If there were more of these creatures, if they had been operating in secret for years, the implications were terrifying. We walked for hours, the terrain slowly changing around us. The steep cliffs gave way to gentler slopes, and the forest began to thin out. It gave me hope that we were nearing the edge of Section 7, maybe even approaching a more frequently traveled part of the park. But as the day wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. We were both dehydrated and hungry, our injuries slowing us down more and more, and all the while that feeling of being watched never left us. It was late afternoon when we heard it, a low rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We froze, scanning the trees around us. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Kira's hand. We took off, ignoring the pain, driven by pure terror. Behind us, I could hear the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. It was toying with us again, I realized. It could have caught us at any time. This was just another part of its sick game. Just when I thought we couldn't run anymore, the trees ahead thinned out, revealing a small clearing. And there, in the center of the clearing, was an old ranger camp. "There," I gasped, pulling Kira towards it. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. I quickly barricaded it with a few pieces of furniture in the cabin, an old chair and a rickety table. For a moment, all we could do was stand there, gasping for breath, listening. The woods had gone silent again, but we knew it was out there, waiting. "What do we do now?" Kira asked, her voice trembling. I looked around the cabin. It was small, just one room with a cot, a wood stove, and an ancient-looking radio. My eyes fixed on the radio. It was a long shot, but it might be our only chance. "We called for help," I said, moving towards the radio. As I fiddled with the dials trying to get a signal, Kira kept watch at the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. "Rust," she said suddenly, her voice tight with fear. "There's something out there." I looked up from the radio, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure. It wasn't the creature we had seen before. This one looked almost human, almost... not quite. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, its face a crude approximation of human features, and its eyes were fixed directly on us. As we watched in horror, more figures emerged from the trees, 5, 10, 15 of them, all with that same, not quite human appearance. They formed a circle around the cabin, silent, waiting. The radio crackled to life in my hands, making us both jump. Through the static, I could hear a voice. "Rust, is that you? Where are you?" It was Gary. I had never been glad to hear his voice in my life. "Gary," I shouted into the radio. "We're in Section 7 in an old ranger cabin. We need immediate evacuation." "Oh, something out here, Gary, something not natural." "Hang tight," Gary's voice came back, filled with concern. "We're coming for you, just hold on." As I turned back to Kira, ready to share the good news, I saw her face pale with terror. She was staring out the window, her whole body shaking. "Rust," she whispered. "They're coming." The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault. The not quite human figures outside had begun to change, their bodies twisting and elongating into monstrous forms. Claws scraped against the wooden walls, and inhuman howls filled the air. Kira and I huddled in the center of the room, armed with the only weapons we could find, a rusted fire poker and a heavy flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. When they bike through, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We make a run for it, heading for the trees. Maybe we can lose them in the dark. Kira nodded, her face pale but determined. Okay, together. The door splintered, wood flying as massive claws tore through it. I could see glowing eyes peering through the gaps, hungry and inhuman. Just as I thought the door would give way entirely, a new sound cut through the chaos, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. The cavalry's here, I said, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. Suddenly the night lit up as if it were day. Floodlights from the helicopter swept across the clearing, illuminating the nightmare scene. The creatures shrieked, some cowering from the light, while others seemed enraged by it. In the confusion, Kira and I made our move. We burst out of the cabin, running for the center of the clearing where the helicopter was attempting to land. The creatures were all around us, their forms shifting between human-like and monstrous. Claws swiped at us, barely missing. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck as we ran. Just when I thought we would make it, a line of park rangers emerged from the trees, armed with high-powered rifles. They opened fire on the creatures, the sound of gunshots mixing with inhuman screams. Kira and I reached the helicopter, hands pulling us aboard. As we lifted off, I looked down at the scene below. The creatures were retreating into the woods, some dragging injured comrades. But me lay still on the ground, their bodies already beginning to dissolve into a black tar-like substance. Gary was in the helicopter, his face a mix of relief and shock. Russ, what the hell happened out there? I shook my head, still trying to process everything myself. I don't know, Gary, but whatever's going on in Section 7's, it's bigger than we ever imagined. As we flew away from the nightmare, I knew that this was far from over. Those creatures, whatever they were, had been there for who knows how long, and I had a feeling they weren't going to give up their hunting grounds easily. In the days that followed, official reports would call it a mass hallucination, a result of the toxic fungus in the area. Section 7 would be closed off for environmental studies. Kira and I knew the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the dark corners of the wilderness. And sometimes when you venture too far off the beaten path, you find yourself face to face with horrors beyond imagination. As I sit here now, months later, I can still hear those inhuman howls in my dream. I know they're still out there waiting, and I know that one day I'll have to go back, because someone has to stand guard at the edge of the known world, keeping the monsters at bay. But for now, I'll cherish the quiet moments, the safety of civilization, because I've seen what lies beyond, in the deep, dark woods. And I know that the line between man and monster is far thinner than we'd like to believe. The dense canopy of Shenandoah National Park loomed over me as I stepped out of my weathered Jeep, the crisp autumn air filled with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. It was 2023, and at 32 years old, Samuel Sam Hawthorne, had been a park ranger here for just over 5 years. The job was a far cry from my previous life as a software engineer in bustling Seattle, but it fulfilled a lifelong dream I'd harbored since I was a kid, obsessively reading National Geographic magazines. As I shouldered my pack and checked my gear one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual chorus of birdsong was oddly muted, and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush seemed more frantic than usual. I chalked it up to the changing seasons and my own nerves. After all, this wasn't a routine patrol. Over the past few weeks, there had been a string of unsettling incidents in the park. Hikers reported eerie sounds echoing through the valleys at night. Sounds that didn't match any known wildlife. More alarmingly, there had been a spike in missing persons reports, 3 in the last month alone. Higher-ups were getting anxious, and search parties had so far turned up nothing. That's where I came in. My uncanny ability to notice small details and my extensive knowledge of the park's terrain made me the ideal candidate for a solo reconnaissance mission. The plan was simple. I hiked deep into the less traveled areas of the park, following the general direction where the strange occurrences had been reported. My job was to observe, document, and report back. Simple, right? As I set off down the overgrown trail, the weight of my backpack settled comfortably against my spine. The familiar rhythm of hiking helped calm my nerves, but I couldn't completely shake the feeling of unease that had taken root in my gut. The forest seemed to press in around me, the shadows between the trees deeper and more menacing than I remembered. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I came across the first sign that something was truly amiss. In a small clearing just off the trail, I spotted a deer carcass. In itself wasn't unusual, nature could be brutal, but as I approached, I realized this was no ordinary kill. The deer's body was mutilated beyond recognition. Its ribcage had been wrenched open, organs missing, and bones exposed. What struck me most was the precision of the wound. This wasn't the work of a bear or mountain lion. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. I crouched down, my heart pounding as I examined the scene more closely. There were no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the deer had been placed here, a grotesque offering to some unknown entity. As I stood up, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind me. I rolled around, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the leaves. Just an oppressive, suffocating silence. "Hello?" I called out immediately, regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small and afraid, swallowed up by the looming trees. There was no response, but I could have sworn I heard the faintest echo of laughter, high-pitched and mocking from somewhere deep in the woods. I fumbled for my radio, desperate to hear a human voice. "Bees, this is Ranger Hawthorne," I said. "I found something. I think I'm gonna need backup." The radio crackled to life, but instead of the dispatcher's familiar voice, all I heard was a low, rhythmic humming, punctuated by what sounded like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was truly alone out here. Whatever was happening in these woods, I was on my own to face it. As I turned back to the trail, steeling myself to press on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Something was out there in the depths of the forest, something that didn't belong in any nature documentary or field guide I'd ever studied. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of my sanity and survival skills. The Shenandoah National Park. I thought I knew what was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and I was walking right into the heart of the mystery. As I continued down the trail, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees, once familiar and comforting, now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I checked my GPS, confirming I was heading deeper into the area where the strange occurrences had been reported. The trail began to fade, becoming less defined with each step. Soon I was pushing through dense underbrush, the leaves and branches scraping against my skin. The silence was broken only by the sound of my labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. As the day wore on, I noticed the landscape beginning to change. The familiar oaks and maples gave way to twisted, ancient-looking trees I couldn't identify. Their bark was dark and gnarled, covered in strange, swirling patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I paused to catch my breath and take a sip of water. That's when I heard it, a low, haunting whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sent a chill down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms. This was no bird call or wind through the trees. It sounded almost human, but distorted. Wrong somehow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" The whistle stopped abruptly, leaving me in oppressive silence once more. I stood perfectly still, straining my ears for any sound. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to move on, I heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush to my left, followed by what sounded like a low, guttural growl. My heart pounding, I slowly turned towards the sound. The bushes parted, and for a split second I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A pair of eyes, glowing an unnatural yellow, peered out at me from the darkness. They were too large to belong to any animal I knew, and they held an intelligence that was decidedly unanimal-like. I stumbled backward, fumbling for my bear spray, but when I looked again, the eyes were gone. Had I imagined it, the stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind as night began to fall? I thought I needed to find shelter. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the thought of spending the night in the open with whatever was out there was unbearable. Just as I was starting to panic, I spotted a small cabin in a clearing ahead. The cabin wasn't on any of my maps, which should have been a red flag. But at that moment, all I could think about was getting inside, away from the watchful presence I felt all around me. As I approached, I realized the cabin was in a state of disrepair. The windows were boarded up and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Still, it was shelter, and I was in no position to be picky. I pushed open the door, wincing at the loud creak of rusted hinges. The interior was dark and musty, filled with cobwebs and a thick layer of dust. But what caught my eye were the walls. Every inch was covered in strange symbols carved deep into the wood. They looked ancient yet somehow fresh, as if they'd been carved yesterday. I ran my fingers over the symbols, a shiver running through me as I did. They seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain, and I had the unsettling feeling that they were watching me, judging me. As I set up my sleeping bag in a corner of the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The forest I thought I knew had revealed a dark, mysterious underbelly, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside had me bolt upright, my heart racing. And always I felt those unseen eyes watching, waiting. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very edge of sanity and survival. I must have dozed off at some point because I awoke with a start, disoriented and covered in cold sweat. The cabin was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. And it all came flooding back. The strange symbols, the glowing eyes in the forest, a feeling of being watched. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. As my eyes adjusted, I realized something was different. The symbols on the walls seemed to be moving, shifting and swirling like living things. I blinked hard. Sure, I must be hallucinating. But when I looked again, the symbols were still in motion, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. And then I heard it. Whispers so faint I could barely make them out, but undeniably there. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and ancient sounding. But somehow, I could understand the meaning behind them. The old ones awakened, they seemed to say. The forest hungers, the sacrifice must be made. I jerked away from the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. This couldn't be real. I must be dreaming. Or maybe I'd eaten some bad rations and was hallucinating. But deep down, I knew this was no dream or hallucination. The whispers continued, growing louder and more frantic. And then, cutting through the cacophony, I heard a scream. It was distant but unmistakably human, filled with terror and pain. Without thinking, I grabbed my pack and bolted out of the cabin. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, momentarily clearing my head. The forest was alive with sound now. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs. Always those whispers. I ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get away from that cabin, away from those whispers. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. In my panic, I'd left behind most of my gear, my flashlight, water bottle, and the clothes on my back. That was it. No feed, no map, no radio. I was lost in a forest that suddenly seemed alien and hostile, with no way to call for help. And somewhere out there, someone was in trouble. That scream still echoed in my mind. As I sat there trying to figure out what to do next, I heard a twig snap nearby. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A figure, hunched and misshapen, darted between the trees. It moved with an unnatural speed and grace, more like a shadow than a solid being. And then it was gone, leaving me to question whether I'd really seen it at all. But I knew I had, just like I knew the whispers were real, the symbols and that scream. Something was very wrong in these woods, and I was right in the middle of it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I made a decision. I couldn't leave, not with someone potentially in danger out there. I had to find out what was going on, had to try to help if I could. With a deep breath, I pushed myself to my feet and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. The forest was awakening around me, but it wasn't the peaceful awakening I was used to. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation. Something was coming, and I had a feeling that when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the canopy, I tried to get my bearings. Without my map or GPS, I had to rely on my knowledge of the park and my instincts. But everything looked different now, twisted and wrong somehow. I decided to head towards higher ground, hoping to get a better view of my surroundings. As I climbed, the forest grew denser, the trees pressing in close on either side of the narrow game trail I was following. The air grew thick and humid, carrying a musty, earthy scent that reminded me of decay. The silence was oppressive, broken only by my labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath my feet. After what felt like hours of climbing, I finally broke through the tree line onto a rocky outcropping. The view should have been breathtaking, miles of unbroken forest stretching out below me, but what I saw made my stomach lurch. The forest was wrong. Patches of trees stood at impossible angles, their trunks twisted and gnarled. In places, the canopy seemed to pulse and writhe as if it were alive. And cutting through it all was a line of darkness, a path of dead and dying vegetation that snaked through the otherwise green expanse. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, a movement caught my eye. Far below, at the edge of the strange dead zone, something was moving. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it was big, much larger than any animal it should be in these woods. I found one from my binoculars, cursing as I remembered I'd left them back at the cabin. Squinting, I tried to focus on the movement. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape hunched, dark, moving with an unnatural fluidity. And it was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. My mind was reeling. None of this made sense. The forest I knew, the forest I'd sworn to protect, had become something alien and threatening overnight. And somewhere out there was a person who needed help, whose screams still echoed in my ears. I had to go down there. I knew it was crazy, knew it was probably suicide, but I couldn't turn back now. I was a park ranger sworn to protect both the land and the people who visited it. I couldn't abandon that duty now, no matter how terrified I was. With a deep breath, I began to make my way down the other side of the ridge toward the dead zone I'd seen from above. The descent was treacherous, the ground loose and unstable under my feet. More than once I nearly lost my footing, saved only by grabbing onto the twisted trunks of nearby trees. As I got closer to the dead zone, the air grew even thicker, filled with a mist that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. The trees here were even more distorted, their bark black and oozing a substance that looked disturbingly like blood. The silence was absolute now, no birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through leaves. It was as if all life had been sucked out of this place, leaving behind only a hollow shell. And then I saw it, a cave entrance half hidden by the twisted vegetation. The dead zone seemed to emanate from it, spreading out like a cancer through the surrounding forest. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn back to run as fast and far in the opposite direction as I could, but I couldn't. That scream still echoed in my mind, driving me forward. With shaking hands, I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam seemed weak and ineffective against the oppressive darkness of the cave mouth, but it was all I had. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the cave. The air was cold and damp, carrying a smell that made me gag, a mix of decay and something else, something alien and wrong. As I ventured deeper, the walls of the cave began to change. Symbols, like those I'd seen in the cabin, but larger and more complex, covered every surface. They seemed to writhe and pulse in the beam of my flashlight as if they were alive. And always there was a whisper, louder now, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but their meaning was clear. I didn't belong here. I was an intruder, a trespasser in a place not meant for human eyes. But I pressed on, driven by a mix of duty and morbid curiosity I couldn't quite explain. Whatever was happening here, whatever had changed my beloved forest into this nightmare realm, I had to know. As I ran to the bend in the tunnel, my flashlight beam fell on something that made me freeze in my tracks. There, propped against the cave wall, was a backpack, mine, the one I'd left behind at the cabin. How was this possible? What had got me here? And more importantly, what did it mean? With trembling hands, I reached out to touch it, half expecting it to disappear like a mirage. But it was solid, real. I unzipped it, finding all my gear exactly as I'd left it. As I stood there trying to make sense of this impossible situation, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps echoing from deeper in the cave and getting closer. My heart pounding in my chest, I quickly shouldered my backpack and looked around frantically for a place to hide. The cave tunnel was narrow, offering little in terms of cover. The footsteps were getting louder, accompanied now by a low guttural sound that was neither human nor animal. With no other option, I pressed myself against the damp cave wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I clicked off my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, casting an eerie, pulsating light that did little to illuminate the cave. The footsteps grew closer, echoing off the cave walls. And then, rounding the bend, I saw it. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It stood on two legs, but that's where any resemblance to a human ended. Its body was covered in coarse matted fur, and its limbs were long and distorted, ending in wickedly sharp claws. But it was the face that truly horrified me. It was a twisted parody of a human face with elongated jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light, the same eyes I'd seen in the forest. Those eyes swept the cave, and I held my breath, praying it wouldn't see me. For a moment I thought I'd escaped detection, but then those glowing eyes locked onto me, and I knew I was done for. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl that reverberated through the cave. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and ran deeper into the cave, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. I could hear it behind me, its claws scraping against the rock as it gave chase. I ran blindly, taking turns at random, my only thought being to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. The creature's howls echoed through the tunnels, sometimes sounding far away, sometimes terrifyingly close. Just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I burst into a large cavern. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in more of those strange symbols. And on that altar, I skidded to a stop, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. There, lying motionless on the altar, was a person. As I approached cautiously, I realized with a start that I recognized him. It was Jeremy, one of the hikers who had gone missing. He was alive, but unconscious, his skin pale and clammy. Strange markings covered his body, similar to the symbols on the cave walls, but somehow more alive. They seemed to writhe and pulse beneath his skin. I reached out to shake him awake, but the moment my hand touched his skin, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed through my mind. The forest twisted and wrong, creatures emerging from the shadows, a dark presence. Ancient and hungry, awakening deep beneath the earth. I stumbled back, gasping. What was happening? What had they done to Jeremy? Before I could gather my thoughts, a growl from behind me made my blood run cold. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The creature stood at the entrance to the cavern, its yellow eyes fixed on me. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes moved in the shadows, more creatures, all different but all sharing that same twisted, nightmarish quality. I was trapped, cornered like an animal. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way out, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. As the creatures advanced, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my head with their alien language. And this time, as the creatures advanced, the symbols on the walls glowed even brighter. The whispers grew louder still, and I understood them. They spoke of an ancient evil, dormant for millennia, now awakening. The forest was its domain, and it hungered. The missing people, the twisted landscape, it was all part of its reemergence. And now it wanted me. I backed up against the altar, my mind racing. There had to be a way out, some way to save Jeremy and myself. As my hand touched the cold stone of the altar, an idea struck me. The symbols, the whispers, they were key to all of this, if I could disrupt them somehow. Without thinking, I pulled out my pocket knife and began to scratch at the symbols on the altar. The effect was immediate. The creatures howled in pain, recoiling as if struck. The whispers turned to screams, filling the cavern with their otherworldly wails. Taking advantage of the chaos, I hoisted Jeremy over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I charged towards the cave entrance, barreling past the disoriented creatures. I ran through the twisting tunnels, not knowing if I was heading towards the exit or deeper into the cave system. Behind me, I could hear the creatures recovering, their howls echoing off the walls as they gave chase. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. The cave exit. With a final burst of energy, I sprinted towards it, erupting into the forest just as the sun was setting. But I couldn't stop. I knew the creatures wouldn't be far behind. I ran through the twisted landscape, the trees seeming to reach out to grab at us as we passed. Jeremy was a dead weight on my shoulder, but I couldn't leave him behind. As night fell, the forest came alive with unnatural sounds, howls, screams, and that ever-present whispering. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a small clearing. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I realized the sounds of pursuit had faded. We had escaped for now, but I knew this was far from over. Whatever had awakened in the forest, whatever these creatures were, they wouldn't give up easily. I looked at Jeremy, still unconscious, the strange symbols pulsing beneath his skin. What had they done to him? And More importantly, could it be undone? As the full moon rose over the twisted canopy, I knew one thing for certain. The Shenandoah National Park I knew was gone. In its place was a nightmare realm, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. The first rays of dawn found me huddled against a gnarled tree trunk, with Jeremy still formed beside me. I hadn't slept, too afraid of what might find us if I let my guard down. The forest had been alive with strange noises all night. Howls, whispers, and sounds I couldn't even begin to describe. As light filtered through the twisted canopy, I got my first good look at our surroundings. The clearing we had collapsed in was surrounded by trees that seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a cage-like dome above us. The ground was bare, the grass and underbrush withered and black. I turned my attention to Jeremy. In the light of day, the symbols on his skin were even more disturbing. They pulsed with a sickly green light, shifting and changing as if alive. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. "Jeremy," I said, shaking him gently. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment I felt a surge of relief. But that relief quickly turned to horror as I saw his eyes. The whites had turned black, and his irises glowed with the same sickly green as the symbols on his skin. He sat up abruptly, his movements jerky and unnatural. When he spoke, his voice was not his own. It was deep, resonant, and carried an echo of those whispers I'd heard in the cave. "The awakening has begun," he said, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. "The old ones stir, the forest hungers." I scrambled back, my heart pounding. "Jeremy, snap out of it. We need to get out of here." His head swaveled towards me, those unnatural eyes locking onto mine. "There is no escape. The forest claims all. You will join us, or be consumed." As he spoke, the symbols on his skin began to writhe more violently. To my horror, I saw them beginning to detach from his flesh, coalescing into snake-like forms that slithered across his body. I wanted to run to get as far away from this nightmare as possible, but I couldn't abandon Jeremy. Whatever had been done to him, there had to be a way to undo it. "Fight it, Jeremy," I yelled, grabbing his shoulders. "This isn't you. Remember who you are?" For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in those alien eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of such malevolence that I instinctively recoiled. Jeremy's body began to contort, his limbs elongating, his fingers extending into claws, the symbols on his skin fully detached, swirling around him in a vortex of sickly green light. I scrambled to my feet, backing away. This was beyond anything I could handle. I needed help, needed to warn someone about what was happening here. As Jeremy's transformation neared completion, a howl echoed through the forest. It was answered by others, closer this time. The creatures from the cave had found us. I turned to run, hating myself for abandoning Jeremy, but knowing I had no choice. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I glanced back one last time where Jeremy had been. Now stood a creature similar to the ones I'd seen in the cave. But this one was different. Larger, more powerful. Its eyes, still that sickly green, fixed on me with terrifying intelligence. "Run, little ranger," it said in that deep, resonant voice. "Run and spread the word. The forest awakens, and soon all will know its hunger." I didn't need to be told twice. I plunged into the twisted forest, branches whipping at my face as I ran. Behind me, I could hear the creatures giving chase, their howls mixing with Jeremy's otherworldly laughter. As I ran, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to stop this, to save Jeremy and anyone else who had fallen victim to whatever evil had awakened in the forest. But first, I had to survive long enough to warn the outside world. The chase was on, and the fate of not just the park, but perhaps the entire world hung in the balance. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't dare stop. The forest around me had become a twisted nightmare, the trees contorting into impossible shapes, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I finally allowed myself to slow down. I needed to catch my breath. I had to think. I had to find a way out of the park and get help. But without my map or GPS, I was hopelessly lost in this warped version of the forest I once knew. I leaned against a tree, trying to get my bearings. That's when I noticed something odd about the bark. Carved into it were more of those strange symbols, pulsing faintly with that sickly green light. As I watched, they seemed to shift and change, forming words in English. The forest sees all, the forest knows all, surrender and join us. I jerked away from the tree, my heart pounding. The message faded, the symbols returning to their original form. Was I losing my mind, or was the forest itself trying to communicate with me? A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around. There, at the edge of a small clearing, stood a figure. For a moment, my heart leapt with hope. Another person. But as the figure stepped into the light, that hope turned to ash. It was Ranger Evans, my supervisor. But like Jeremy, he had been changed. His skin was pale and almost translucent, with those same writhing symbols just beneath the surface. His eyes glowed with that unnatural green light. "Sam," he said, his voice carrying that same resonant quality I'd heard from Jeremy. "We've been looking for you. It's time to come home." I backed away, shaking my head. "This isn't home, Evans. This isn't you. Fight it." He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Fight it? Why would I want to fight this gift?" "The forest has opened my eyes, Sam. It can do the same for you. Join it. Become one with the forest." As he spoke, more figures emerged from the trees, fellow rangers, missing hikers, even some of the local townspeople. All were changed, all bearing those glowing symbols. They began to advance, forming a circle around me. I looked for a way out, but there was none. I was trapped. "So I fight it, Sam," Eden said, stepping closer. "The old ones have awakened. The forest grows stronger every day. Soon it will spread beyond the park. The whole world will know its power." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I won't let that happen. We'll find a way to stop this." Evans smiled, a terrible sight on his transformed face. Brave words, but futile. "You'll learn, Sam. No one is coming to help you. No one even knows what's happening here." As he reached out to grab me, a sound cut through the air. A helicopter. We all looked up to see a black chopper swooping low over the trees. The transformed people around me recoiled, hissing in pain as a high-pitched noise emanated from the helicopter. Evans stumbled back, his face contorted in agony. A rope ladder dropped from the chopper, dangling just a few feet away from me. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Ranger Hawthorne, grab the ladder." Now, I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the ladder, grabbing on just as the helicopter began to rise. Villainy Evans and the others howled in rage, their cries fading as we gained altitude. As I climbed into the helicopter, I was met by a team of people in hazmat suits. One of them helped me into a seat, strapping me in. "Ranger Hawthorne," a woman's voice said through a speaker in her suit. "I am Dr. Simmons with the CDC. We've been monitoring the situation in the park. We're lucky we found you when we did." My head was spinning. "The CDC, how did you know?" "We've been tracking an anomaly in this area for weeks," she explained. "Your radio distress call yesterday gave us the coordinates we needed. We've been searching for you since then." I slumped in my seat, the adrenaline fading and leaving me utterly exhausted. "What's happening down there? What are those things?" Dr. Simmons shook her head. "We're not entirely sure, but whatever it is, it's spreading. The entire park is under quarantine now." As we flew away from Shenandoah, I looked out the window at the forest below. From up here it looked normal, peaceful even. But I knew the truth. Something ancient and evil had awakened, and it was hungry. What happens now, I asked. Now, Dr. Simmons said, her voice grim. We prepare for war, because if we can't contain this, God help us all. As the helicopter carried me away from the nightmare I just escaped, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The forest had shown its true nature and the world would never be the same. The weeks following my rescue passed in a blur of debriefings, medical tests, and sleepless nights. The CDC had set up a base of operations just outside the quarantine zone, a bustling compound of temporary buildings and military-grade equipment. I spent most of my time with Dr. Simmons and her team, recounting every detail of my experience in the forest. They listened with rapt attention, their faces growing grimmer with each passing day. The symbols you described, Dr. Simmons said one afternoon, spreading out a series of photographs on the table between us. We found similar markings at other sites around the world, ancient sites buried for thousands of years. I leaned in, studying the images. The symbols were unmistakable, identical to the ones I'd seen in the forest. What does it mean? Dr. Simmons sighed, removing her glasses and rubbing her eyes. We're not sure, but whatever is happening in Shenandoah, it's not an isolated incident. We've detected similar energy signatures in forests all over the globe. It's like the Earth itself is waking up. A chill ran down my spine at her words. I remembered what Evans had said. Soon it will spread beyond the park. The whole world will know its power. What about the people? I asked. Jeremy, Evans, the others, is there any way to help them? Dr. Simmons' face fell. We're working on it, but it's not looking good. Whatever has changed them, it's rewriting their very DNA. We've never seen anything like it. As the days turned to weeks, the situation only grew more dire. The quarantine zone had to be expanded several times as the forest continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. Towns were evacuated, families displaced. The media was in a frenzy, spinning wild theories about government experiments gone wrong or alien invasions if they only knew the truth. 1 month after my rescue, Dr. Simmons called me to the command center. The room was abuzz with activity, screens displaying satellite imagery and data readouts I couldn't begin to understand. It's happening, she said without preamble. The forest is making its move. On the main screen, I watched in horror as satellite images showed the twisted landscape of Shenandoah rapidly expanding. Charles grew at impossible speeds, roads and buildings disappearing beneath a tide of green. My God, I whispered, how fast is it spreading? Too fast, Dr. Simmons replied grimly. At this rate, it'll reach major population centers within days. We're out of time. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Sam, we need your help. You're the only one who's been in there and come out unscathed. Well, Unchained, we're mounting a last-ditch effort to stop this thing at its source. I knew what she was asking before she said it. I had to go back into that nightmare forest, to the heart of the madness. As I suited up, my mind raced with everything I'd seen and learned. The ancient evil awakening, the transformed people, the hungry forest. It all seemed too big, too overwhelming. How could we possibly hope to stop it? But as I looked around at the determined faces of scientists and soldiers preparing for the mission, I felt a glimmer of hope. We might be outmatched. We might be facing something beyond our understanding, but we weren't giving up. As I departed the helicopters that would take us back to Shenandoah, I thought of Jeremy, Evans, and all the people trapped in there. I thought of the world outside, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows of the trees. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. The battle for the soul of the forest, and perhaps the world itself, was about to begin. And I was right in the middle of it all, a reluctant hero in a war I never asked for but couldn't walk away from. As the choppers lifted off, carrying us towards the heart of the nightmare, I steeled myself for what was to come. The forest had shown us its true nature, dark, hungry, and ancient. Now it was time for humanity to show ours. The final confrontation awaited, and the fate of the world hung in the balance.